Have you ever wondered how many beautiful and successful girls are killed by scoundrels just to satisfy their lust? A whole life, dreams, opportunities destroyed in an instant. And the worst part is that the criminals have been living among us for years. Today, we will visit the southern U.S. state of Arkansas and look at a case that has officially remained unsolved to this day. Our story begins at the University of Louisiana, where a young music student, Carol Yvette Larpenter, fell in love with her professor, Paul Dirksmeyer. Let's imagine that they were very happily married together, as their union lasted for years and gave the world a beautiful baby girl, Nona. December 26, 1985, in the small town of Zachary in the state of Louisiana, was born Nona Carol Dirksmeyer. After the birth of her daughter, the family moved to the town of Dover, where the childhood and adolescence of the girl passed. Nona grew up a timid and insecure child. She liked to be alone and was reluctant to make friends with peers. At a young age, her birth father mistreated her, which affected the girl's emotional state. It is not known exactly how long this went on, but Nona never told anyone about it until her father's death in 1996. After his death, Nona grew stronger morally and tried to trust the people around her again. In middle school, Nona became friends with her classmate Kevin Jones. Teenagers trusted each other's secrets and helped each other in their studies. Gradually, friendship turned into something more and young people began to meet. In 2004, after graduating from Dover High School, Nona entered Arkansas Tech University, where she majored in music education, so she and her mother had to move from their hometown to a larger city, Russellville. Nona grew up to become a radiant beauty, who charmed others not only with her beauty and enchanting voice, but also with a huge kind heart. But it was difficult for her to be happy. Nona did not consider herself a beauty, because she did not see what her friends saw in her when they offered her to participate in beauty contests. But one day she agreed to the entreaties and entered the Miss Arkansas pageant. But she didn't really care about the prestige of the Miss Arkansas title or other honors. She just wanted to find a way to educate others about what happens to children who are abused by their parents, because the trauma she had previously suffered was forever etched in her soul. Nona was the perfect person to volunteer with, as she always wanted other children to be able to enjoy their childhood and have someone they could talk to if they needed to, rather than being silent for years because of fear. She was the reigning Miss Petit Jean Valley and entered beauty pageants to raise awareness about abuse. Kevin was always there to help Nona through some of the difficult times she was living through. People around them thought they were a perfect couple, and they were just very happy together. Their mutual feeling with Kevin grew stronger. They dated for several years and made plans for the future. Kevin was a popular athlete at Arkansas Tech University. Besides, their families liked each other. Life flowed on its own. Nona's mom, Carol, remarried a while later to Dwayne Dipert, who was in no hurry to show paternal feelings for Nona, and that suited her just fine. When Dwayne came into her mother's life, Nona moved out and got her own separate apartment. On Christmas Eve 2005, Kevin, after coming home from college, went to Nona's apartment where they spent a wonderful romantic evening. After midnight, he drove home from Russellville to Dover. He called Nona when he got home to tell her he had made it home safe and sound. He overslept the next morning, and when he woke up and turned on his phone, he saw a text message from Nona. "Good morning, Kendall Muffin. I love you and hope you have a great day." Kevin knew that Nona had plans for December 15th, so he didn't bother her with a return message. Nona was working at a volunteer organization that day, and Kevin had invited his mother Janice to a Christmas party for teachers. But on the way to the party, Kevin told his mom that he was a little worried about Nona since she hadn't returned any of his calls during the day. He thought it was very strange that Nona hadn't returned his calls, because in 4.5 years, we had developed a certain stereotype, and they were sure to return each other's calls. He sent her a text message. "Are you alive?" But there was no response. But where was she and why wasn't she answering? In his haste to leave the party, Kevin called his friend Ryan, who worked as a pizza delivery guy. He asked him to stop by Nona's house and check on her since his delivery area was near her house. Standing outside Nona's house, Ryan informed Kevin that the light was on in her apartment, but no one opened the door. Overcoming the rising tide of panic, Kevin and his mother hurried to Nona's apartment. On the spot, he realized he didn't have the keys to the apartment with him, so he and Ryan started knocking and ringing the doorbell, but no one opened. Panic was building, and Kevin felt like he was going crazy with worry. He knew the apartment had another sliding glass door in the back, and they ran to it. Kevin didn't think he could get in through that door because he knew Nona always kept a stick in the handle to keep that entrance securely closed. But the stick wasn't there. As he reached the door and grasped the handle, Ryan touched it and shrieked, "There she is, can't you see her?" Inside, there was Nona lying on the floor, naked and motionless. Kevin ran into the apartment, flipped Nona over and hugged her. He yelled that she needed to be taken to the hospital right away. He wiped the blood from her face and tried CPR, but her eyes were closed and blood was flowing from the head wound. Kevin's mom, who went up to the apartment after the boys called emergency services. She said, "My son's friend. I think she's dead. There's been a terrible accident." While waiting for help, Kevin picked Nona up in his arms and cradled her as if to keep her warm. His hands were covered in her blood. He was crying hard, but he couldn't wipe away the tears. A few minutes later, paramedics and police arrived. Nona was stripped naked, an empty condom wrapper lying on a table a few feet away. But there was no physical evidence that she had been raped. Her head had been crushed, probably by the heavy base of the lamp lying next to her, and whoever had delivered the fatal blow had first struck her in the face with a fist and then stabbed her several times with a knife with shallow cuts on her neck and shoulders. Before swinging the lampstand, the perpetrator strangled her with such force that he broke the hyoid bone in her neck. It became obvious that this was indeed a murder. Kevin was taken to the station to ask only a few questions about Nona. As a result, for more than 3 hours at the station, Kevin was interrogated about his relationship with Nona, how it happened that he was the one who found her body, and where he spent the whole day. According to Kevin, it was not an interrogation, but a conviction on the part of the police officers that he was involved, accompanied by shouting and saying that they knew he did it. So from being Nona's boyfriend, Kevin Jones turned into a suspect in her murder. Kevin denied his involvement, and when he was asked to take a polygraph test, he agreed. During the lie detector, he was worried, sometimes hesitated over the answers. In the end, he was informed that he failed the test, which meant that it was Kevin who killed Nona. But the guy continued to deny his involvement in the tragedy. Nona and Kevin were high school sweethearts who had been dating for 5 years. There was never anything in their relationship that could hint that Kevin had a temper or was crazy, but immediately all suspicions fell on him. But why didn't the police look more closely at other possible suspects? The police said they checked the alibis of all the potential suspects, thus settling on Kevin. On December 22, 2005, the state medical examiner's office determined that 19-year-old Nona Dirksmeyer died from multiple blunt and acute injuries that included stab wounds on the back right side of her neck and superficial cuts on the front and right side of her neck, shoulder, and ear. You won't believe how unfortunate the crime scene was, and you'll be shocked when you hear that the person who could have done this was lurking in the shadows all along. But it begs the question that if it wasn't Kevin, who did it and why? But let's continue in order. The investigation was initially assigned to Detective Mark Frost, who had never investigated a murder before. From day one, the investigation faced several problems. First, Kevin had seriously compromised the evidence by touching his girlfriend's body, hugging her and cradling her as he tried to bring Nona back to life. Second, multiple paramedics and police officers arrived at the scene, touching and moving potential evidence. Indeed, key evidence, such as the condom wrapper, the lamp, and Nona's cell phone, were moved multiple times, and their original locations were not recorded. As for the condom wrapper, police were unable to lift any fingerprints from it to determine whose they might have been. Nevertheless, within a week, the crime and the perpetrator were fully solved, according to police. And of course it was Kevin. The investigation was certain that he had deliberately created an elaborate disguise, using his mother and a friend to help find the body and thereby throw suspicion off himself. He left a condom wrapper as a ruse to make it look like a stranger had taken advantage of Nona and killed her. The motive was known as alleged infidelity, which Kevin happened to learn about a few days before the crime. But no arrest followed. Despite the fact that the police believed Kevin was guilty, the investigation of the crime, led by Mark Frost, eventually took several months. During that period, from Nona's death to Kevin's arrest, rumors abounded around town. The police told Nona's mother, who had once loved Kevin, that Kevin was responsible for her daughter's death. They told her that he went on a rampage and killed Nona when he entered her apartment and saw a condom wrapper. He that Nona was with another man. They believed he had staged the crime scene. On March 31st, 2006, police finally announced the arrest of Kevin Jones for the murder of Nona Dirksmeyer. A whole new reality had set in for Kevin. The publicized evidence included what seemed to be irrefutable proof. Kevin's palm print was on the very lamp used to kill Nona. The murder of 19-year-old Nona Dirksmeyer came as a terrible shock to the city of Russellville, so it received more statewide publicity than any criminal case in years. Before the trial began, the defense asked for a change of venue, as the public was adamant about their suspicions and rumors, and the defense felt that Kevin would not get a fair trial. The request was granted, so the trial began in Ozark, which is almost 30 miles from Russellville. Jeff Phillips, an assistant prosecutor, presented Nona Dirksmeyer's case to the jury as a case of jealous boyfriend rage. According to the prosecutor, it was easy for Kevin to show up at Nona's apartment unannounced because he had a key. While there, he likely found a text message on Nona's phone from another man or a used condom in a package on the table. That's when he went on a rampage and attacked his girlfriend. He beat her, slashed her with a knife, and finally stabbed her with a heavy lamp base, leaving a bloody palm print on the bulb itself. Investigator Mark Frost, who discovered the palm print on the light bulb through forensics, determined that it was left there at the time of the crime, and not later when Kevin, his mother, and his friend discovered Nona's body. Lying on her body and then hugging her, the prosecution said, was a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence at the crime scene, and in fact police found very little usable evidence. But on the night the police questioned Kevin, they didn't think they would get straight answers, especially about his alibi, which according to the investigator came together a little too well as of late. According to the prosecution, on the morning of the crime, Kevin left his Dover home around 10:30 a.m. as he waited for the plumber to leave. After that, Kevin's phone went silent for an hour and a half. The prosecution's chronology of events looked like this. 10:30 a.m. Kevin leaves Dover to visit Nona in Russellville. 10:55 a.m. He enters the apartment, argues with Nona, kills her, leaves his palm print on the light bulb. 11:10 a.m. Removes a condom wrapper from the scene. 11:15 a.m. Leaves back to Dover, returns around noon. There was one small snag in this prosecution chronology, however, and that was that Kevin's grandmother testified at trial that she saw her grandson at the gas station at 11:30 a.m. on December 15. According to her, she talked to him and gave him money for lunch. And if that were true, Kevin wouldn't have had time to drive to Nona's apartment and back, let alone kill her. There was only one piece of evidence at all, a bloody palm print on a light bulb. But maybe it's a completely innocent situation, and the blood got on the bulb the moment the body was discovered, when Kevin was trying to revive Nona. He could have just accidentally touched the light bulb. The EMT said the light bulb was about a foot away from the body. While they were digging into the case, attorneys said, they kept finding strange things in the investigation by first homicide detective Mark Frost. The only place where fingerprints were lifted appeared to be the area around the body. The police officers who inspected Nona's apartment after the attack did not pay proper attention to the blood near the front door, the blinds, which were also covered in blood. nor did they examine the bathroom for possible fingerprints. Nothing was done except in the area around the body. The bloody palm print was not the only evidence on the lamp. It turned out that later on, the police did manage to lift some fingerprints from the base of that lamp as well, and the prints that were on the working part of the murder weapon, the rod in the base, did not belong to Kevin Jones. They belonged to an unidentified person. The court learned that in addition to Kevin, Janice, and Ryan entering the apartment, so did several paramedics and police officers go around the crime scene, and some evidence was touched and moved. As for Kevin's palm print on the lamp, the same lamp that police said was the murder weapon, the defense argued that the palm print was on the lamp, and it could indeed have been when Kevin found Nona's body. Nona's cell phone was also found in the apartment, but it was not tested for fingerprints or DNA. Kevin's lawyers fought hard for his good name, proving to the court that there was no evidence against him at all. The defense used the testimony of Kevin's grandmother, which showed that he didn't have time to drive to and from Nona's apartment. The defense also told the jury that the perpetrator had several cuts and bruises on his hands and body after beating Nona. Police took pictures of Kevin, the front and back of his hands and his body when they spoke to him on December 15, and there were no bruises, scratches, or any abrasions on his body. Then there was a strange story about Nona's cell phone. It was at the scene, but the battery was missing. The perpetrator must have touched the phone since he removed the battery, the defense said, but the phone was never checked for fingerprints. The defense had been asking for months to take a look at the phone, perhaps to check its electronic history to see who Nona was texting or talking to. But when they finally got the phone and turned it over to a forensic scientist for information, they found that the device's memory had been wiped. The state then admitted to giving the phone to Nona's stepfather, Dwayne Diepert, stating that no more information could be obtained from it. The loss of the phone's memory was a blow because while phone company experts were able to recover messages sent to Nona, her responses, which could have identified the suspect, were lost forever. Remember the polygraph test? In court, the defense said it had checked the polygraph examiner's file and the person who administered the test was not a certified polygraph examiner. This was an attempt to pressure Kevin into confessing. There was an entire town watching who were largely convinced of Kevin's guilt. But was he guilty? The 5 jurors were very enthusiastic about the case. After 8 hours of deliberation, they returned to the courtroom, and they found Kevin Jones not guilty of the murder of Nona Dirksmeyer. An emotional dam burst in the courtroom after the acquittal was handed down. The decision devastated those who loved Nona and thought Kevin was at fault. But those who thought that was the end of it were very much mistaken, for this was only the beginning. Prosecutors were forced to say that the acquittal came after a botched police investigation. In the months that followed, Kevin and his family assigned Todd Steffi, a part-time police officer, to investigate the murder. Todd immediately sent the condom wrapper to be analyzed, and the lab found several traces of male DNA on it. Since this DNA did not belong to Kevin, authorities began looking for a needle in a haystack until an unrelated arrest forced Gary Dunn to visit the local police station. It was then that Todd Steffi was able to obtain his DNA and find a match to the one on the condom wrapper. On top of that, Todd also noticed that Gary had been out shopping on December 13th, not December 15th as he had reported in the first interview, which put a hole in his alibi. After prosecutors announced on February 6th, 2008, that the DNA on the condom wrapper matched Dunn's DNA, the prosecution team focused its attention on him. Gary Dunn was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution alleged that he either took advantage of Nona or attempted to do so before beating her to death. Gary Dunn and his wife lived in the same apartment complex as Nona. A police investigation later proved that Gary had been stalking the 19-year-old beauty queen 24/7, as his window was directly across the street from the victim's home. Interestingly, other residents of the complex insisted that Gary had recently moved into the neighborhood and said little about their new neighbor. He kept mostly to himself and rarely had friends in his apartment. In addition, several residents also mentioned that Gary had a troubled relationship with his wife. It remains a mystery how Gary Dunn was able to get into the apartment, as Nona's friends claimed that she always kept the door locked. The prosecutor suggested that Dunn might have knocked on Nona's door and introduced himself as her neighbor, who came to ask about her cat. Because Nona's love of animals was known to others, and with Gary's daily surveillance, it would have been easy for him to find out. And indeed, at the scene, a bag of cat food was found on the floor, which had not been opened. When questioned, Gary's wife confirmed that he had been peeping on Nona for a long time in order to study her lifestyle. The girl pitied stray cats, taking them from the street, and it became a great excuse to get into her apartment. On December 15th, 2005, a neighbor knocked on her apartment under the pretext that he brought her stray kittens, and Nona opened the door. Then he broke in and attacked the girl, but Gary pleaded not guilty. When he was introduced in court, Gary's lawyers said that his DNA was a partial match to the one found at the crime scene, which meant that it was impossible to convict someone based on that evidence alone. In addition, the defense also argued that Kevin was the actual killer and should not have been allowed to go free. Such an argument instilled enough doubt in the minds of the jury, and the first trial ended in a mistrial. During the second trial, the court heard that Gary had previously been convicted of assaulting a woman back in 2002. It transpired that he had previously been charged with attempted murder and second-degree battery after he attacked a female jogger in Russellville. He was acquitted of the charges at that time, but found guilty of the second-degree battery charge and sentenced to 6 years in prison. The defense also questioned the DNA evidence. Prosecutors argued that Gary was linked to the crime scene by DNA found on a condom wrapper, while defense counsel disputed the alleged coincidence and argued that the evidence could not be trusted because of how it was collected and how the crime scene was contaminated. Gary's trial ended in a deadlock for the jury. They were never able to decide if he was guilty or not. A second trial was held, but the result was the same. However, the evidence was once again inconclusive, and the jury was divided for the second time. Although the second trial forced authorities to release Gary, he was sent to jail on a separate weapons charge before being arrested and convicted of kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, and indecent exposure for 2 unrelated incidents in 2019. Gary pleaded no contest to those charges and was sentenced to prison. So today Gary, who was sentenced to 15 years, is in custody at the Arkansas Department of Corrections office in Wrightsville, where he will remain at least until his parole eligibility date. Prosecutors had planned to try Gary a third time, but decided against it, and instead asked the judge to dismiss the charges against him. Despite this, the charges could be refiled. Kevin Jones was able to persevere through the unjust charges and sued the police, who investigated the situation for ignoring the facts and being irresponsible with the evidence. In 2010, he went on to study law. Kevin now works as a lawyer and is committed to helping those who suffer from police negligence or unprofessionalism. He currently resides in Little Rock, where he is happily married and engaged in a labor of love that has become his life's work. From Kevin Jones's interview. Now I know exactly how it feels when people think you did something you didn't do, and I would never wish that on anyone else. I still sometimes have dreams with her, with Nona, and I see her there again and again. The conclusion of this story begs the fair question, will justice ever prevail for Nona? The life of a young, beautiful, and talented girl, it will not return. But I want to believe that if the criminal did not receive his punishment from the people who represent the law on earth, then from God's punishment he will not be able to hide. It's just a matter of time. All of you have probably watched the famous sitcom Friends. It tells about the life of 6 friends who live in the neighborhood. So in episode 9 of season 8, Monica and Joey have a dialogue. "What's in there, Pie?" Joey asked. Monica confirmed and offered to give it a try. The guy asked for a tiny slice, however, then corrected a few times. "Bigger. More. What are you afraid of? Cut a normal piece." I think everyone realized it was about greed. This humorous miniature only at first glance seems funny, but for our story today, it's a perfect fit. Another crime story about what unbridled desires lead to, as well as greed, selfishness, and lies. Farewell. Spring 2007. The city of Newport News, Virginia, USA. The funeral of Corey Voss, a young officer of the U.S. Navy, was held, as it should be, in a solemn atmosphere. At the farewell ceremony was attended by the leadership of the servicemen, as well as colleagues, family, friends, and simply indifferent residents. A well-meaning husband, father of 2 children, and a promising sailor was shot dead in the passenger compartment of his truck. The killer left no chance of survival. And while Marine police agents joined forces with the city's police department in search of the perpetrator, people said goodbye to Corey. They said the world was orphaned to another bright soul, they said of Corey. However, a great loss was suffered by the man's inner circle, his parents, wife, and children. Barbara Wilson, the protagonist's mother, was devastated. But even more depressing was the sad sight that unfolded in the cemetery. The grief-stricken widow was sobbing inconsolably and wailing over her husband's grave. Her reaction did not surprise those present. Many thought that Catherine Voss had lost her beloved husband, male support, and well-being. However, few guessed that behind the heartbreaking scene is a fake love and double life of the newly widowed. Background: Corey Allen Voss was born in 1977 in the city of Berwyn, Illinois. He grew up in a prosperous and friendly family, was surrounded by attention and love. At the same time, he was a little stiff and uncommunicative. In adolescence, the guy got involved with a bad company, from which he often caused problems. His mother often repeated that Corey has a great future, if, of course, he lives to 18 years and does not fit in anywhere. His mother's words proved prophetic. The difficult period was left behind as soon as the young man graduated from high school. He was very determined and wanted to connect his life with military service. After receiving a bachelor's degree, he joined the Navy. After graduation, he earned a prestigious military profession and was assigned to the Norfolk Naval Base in southeastern Virginia. The hardships of Army life did not intimidate Voss. He possessed an inquisitive mind, endless work ethic, and a resilient spirit. Corey wanted his parents to be proud of him. It must be said that his efforts were noted not only by his family, but also by his superiors. The young military man had great potential and received a rank in 4 courses of study. His co-workers often joked that he got to the Navy like a duck in the water. Fateful acquaintance. In 1999, a pleasant change occurred in Corey's life. During a vacation, he met a girl named Catherine Wiggins. She impressed him with her charisma, appetizing forms, and exotic accent. As Kat later told him, she was originally from Ukraine. However, she moved to the States in high school. The young people liked each other and soon began dating. It can be said that Corey met his first love. After 3 months, the romantic relationship bore fruit. Catherine became pregnant, and in 2000, the couple got married. Later, Barbara Wilson admitted that the young people signed not because of the child, and because the son, and without that, was going to legitimize their feelings. In the same year, the couple had a daughter, Casey, and a year later, a son, Corey Jr. The Voss family resembled a classic American family. The couple got along well with each other. The children grew up in love and care. They had a good income, a beautiful house. The financial situation allowed Kat not to work, to be engaged in the household and upbringing of the boys. At the same time, the woman did not deny herself anything, drove a BMW, dressed well, watched her appearance. Her husband in every way idolized her and worked for the good of the family. Corey's military career was going uphill. In 2005, he received the rank of officer and promotion. The only negative point was the numerous business trips of the head of the family. However, and with this task, the couple coped amicably. Distance was replaced by the joy of meetings, and feelings always remained fresh. At the same time, the man tried to spend all his free time with his children. Later, they often recalled this and believed that their father gave them everything he could. April 27th. In January 2007, Corey Voss was assigned to the ship Elrod. Finally, when the man returned from a long business trip, Catherine decided to pleasantly surprise him. In the evening of April 27th, she organized a romantic dinner by candlelight. When the children went to bed, she suddenly remembered that she had not prepared money to pay for lunches at school, so she asked her husband to drive to the nearest ATM to cash out the card. Corey, despite his fatigue, did not refuse his beloved wife. At around 11:30 p.m., he got behind the wheel of his truck and drove away from home. He did not return home after that. The night became restless for Catherine, who tried to find her husband. She repeatedly called his cell phone, but it was not answered. She even dialed the dispatch office at the naval base. The woman decided to check if perhaps he had been called to work on the way. However, the response from Norfolk employees was negative, so she started calling all the hospitals in the city. However, he was not there either. On April 28th around 6 a.m., a frightened Mrs. Voss contacted emergency services. She told the dispatcher about her trouble and asked if Corey had been in an accident. The dispatcher verified the information and advised that no such thing had been reported. The emergency worker advised the caller not to hesitate and contact law enforcement. Catherine took the advice and was at the police station within an hour. Finding. When the officers listened to Catherine, it was decided to start the investigation immediately. The search for the missing man began literally in the first hours after the report was received. By lunchtime, police received a call from a woman. She reported a suspicious truck in the parking lot, but more attention of a random passerby attracted a man in the driver's seat. The man was in an unnatural pose and was not moving. This fact worried her, and she decided to report what she saw. The description of the vehicle found was similar to the missing Corey truck. When patrol officers arrived at the address, some scary things came to light. The vehicle was in a supermarket parking lot and did indeed belong to the wanted man. The man behind the wheel turned out to be Corey Voss, and he was dead. His body was mangled with gunshot wounds. 3 bullets pierced his abdomen, 1 each to his arm and chest. It was unclear what happened to the military man who had just gone to the ATM. The first version that detectives assumed was a robbery, but at first glance nothing was missing. There was a weighty wedding ring on the dead man's hand. Also, there were no signs of a struggle or a search for anything in the car. So the authorities immediately switched to the more serious assumption: murder. However, who needed the death of a naval officer, and for what purpose? The investigation was decided to begin with the establishment of the facts of the personal life of the victim and his immediate environment. Interrogations began with Catherine Voss, Corey's 32-year-old wife. Witness statements. As soon as Kat was informed of her husband's death, she became hysterical. The officers even offered to call a doctor or take the widow to the hospital. However, in time she calmed down somewhat and was able to speak. Mrs. Voss recounted in detail the events of the previous evening, a romantic dinner, and a request to go to an ATM. Then she described her efforts to find Corey. To the questions of investigators about possible enemies, she answered categorically no. Catherine admitted that her spouse was an unconflicted and friendly person who was unlikely to have any problems. At least, she would have known about them, as they trusted each other. The marriage of the Voss couple seemed perfect, and at first glance there was no doubt about it. However, cases of murder motivated by jealousy or greed were not uncommon. That's why it was necessary to properly vet the spouse herself. Corey's relatives could not say anything bad about him. They also believed that he was loved by everyone around him. At the same time, unexpected circumstances regarding Catherine came to light. Corey's mother revealed that the young spouse was dishonest by marrying her son. It turns out that while she was dating Corey, she was married and had a daughter. However, when she found out she was pregnant, she confessed everything to her husband and divorced him. At the same time, leaving the child from her first marriage to live with her grandmother. Barbara admitted that this news was shocking. However, at that time, Kat was already divorced, and Corey was very much in love and was looking forward to the birth of a daughter. At the same time, the woman reported that this became the only thing that was stressful about the daughter-in-law. Other than that, she was wonderful. After her testimony, authorities decided to find Mrs. Voss's ex-husband and talk to him. Steve Larson revealed that he met his ex-wife while in high school. They had a strong love affair, which resulted in the 17-year-old getting pregnant. Since their parents were against the relationship, the couple decided to elope. When everyone learned about Catherine's interesting situation, were forced to accept their union. It is noteworthy that Larson was also a military man who was often absent due to business trips. After returning from one of them, the spouse confessed everything, and afterwards added that she filed for divorce and left. At the same time, he said that he was ready to forgive her infidelity if she had not been so determined. Joint life with his wife he described as an eternal struggle. The family often quarreled over money. According to Steve's words, there was always not enough money for Catherine. After these stories, Mrs. Voss's personality no longer seemed ideal. Representatives of the authorities also talked to the base management and the seafarers' colleagues. None of them had anything bad to say about him. Officer Voss was considered exemplary in every way. He built his military career by himself. During his service, he had received numerous awards. Everyone argued that there was hardly anyone who would take his life because of a disagreement on the job. In order to investigate the murder, the Marine Police joined forces with the Land Police. A direct line was organized where anyone could call and report information of interest to the case. The public was extremely outraged by the death of the military officer and demanded the quick capture of the culprit. The media fueled the excitement and voiced all sorts of assumptions about what had happened. Evidence. In parallel with the collection of data on the family of Corey, other investigative activities were taking place. To learn about what happened on the night of April 27th, detectives requested surveillance footage from a store near the ill-fated ATM. A man resembling Corey did appear at the time in question. He attempted to withdraw money 3 times. However, there were insufficient funds on the card. After unsuccessful attempts, he proceeded to his truck. But as soon as he got behind the wheel, a man in all black got into the passenger seat. Unfortunately, we didn't get a good look at the passenger's face. However, through the windshield it was visible that he pulled out a gun and pointed it at the naval officer. The car then veered off toward another supermarket and into a blind spot. Based on the available evidence, it was clear that the intruder did not intend to rob the victim. His goal was premeditated murder. Otherwise, he would have taken everything of value that was in plain sight. But he didn't. It is unlikely that someone could have prevented him because no one was recorded in the vicinity. The search for witnesses continued. Two-faced Catherine. A turning point for the investigation came after Ashley Doyle, a friend of Catherine Voss, called the hotline. The woman said that the widow appeared different than she really was. The thing is, Catherine was leading a double life. When her husband was away on business trips, she met other men. Kat went to bars and got acquainted there, posing as a native of Ukraine. In reality, it was a blatant lie. She was born and raised in Newport News, and her parents were Native Americans. Catherine imitated a foreign accent in order to have fun and to be in the constant attention of the male sex. She lied to everyone around her, and even her husband's family believed it. And it had to be said, it worked. She had tons of admirers. To go on dates, she would leave her children with relatives. Otherwise, she gave them an antihistamine with sedative properties. While the babies slept, she could do whatever she wanted. Ashley also admitted that since the end of 2006, her friend began dating a certain Michael Draven. Catherine met him on the internet and fell in love with him hard. The man presented himself as a rather famous and wealthy photographer. His MySpace account confirmed this, which initially enticed Catherine. She bragged to Ashley that, according to her lover, he was receiving a 6-figure sum. However, it later turned out that it was all little more than dust in the eyes. The man lived in Newport News in an ordinary trailer with his mother and had no steady income. It frustrated Kat. She had fallen into a love trap. But since the woman was madly in love, she forgave the deception and continued the futile relationship. While Corey was absent for work, Michael often visited their home. The pal also shared her dreams of divorce, to which Ashley remarked that in the case of a breakup, her usual way of life would change Voss replied that she would deal with it somehow. That was why Ashley had been so disturbed when she'd learned what had happened. She was suspicious of Catherine. This information shed light on the true relationship between the couple, now favorably represented otherwise, Lizhevaya, Belichnoi, wrong and mercantile woman. Possible, whether the new boyfriend was the one who wanted to take the place of her husband and rid of the only obstacle on the way to happiness? Or maybe, is it maybe a conspiracy of two persons with the purpose of eliminating unlawful third? A what-if witness Elgal and wanted to Oglethie unhappy, 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 unhappy. It turns out that Michael Draven is indeed related to Catherine Voss. Thanks to social media, it was found that the young people were in close contact. Just a couple days after Corey's death, Michael posted pictures of himself with Kat and her children. Above one of them, he left the caption, "My daughter Casey." The man clearly claimed to be her future husband. Since it was not possible to meet him, investigators talked to his mother. During the conversation, some curious things came to light. Her son changed his real name from Anthony Neff to Michael Anthony Draven. The man did this in honor of the main character of the movie The Crow, which he wanted to be like. In general, he had a dream to build a movie career. But in fact, everything was reduced to roles in the crowd in low-budget films. He lived off a part-time newspaper delivery boy and was a lab rat. For a fee, he took part in testing drugs and different methods of treatment. Lamentation. To clear up the Voss family's financial situation, detectives pulled up recent transactions. It became apparent that a few days after her husband's death, Catherine received a $100,000 payout as a military wife. Afterward, she traveled with her children on a trip. Catherine positioned the vacation as an opportunity for a change of scenery and to distract the little ones. However, in fact, spent a romantic vacation with her lover. Financial operations on the card showed that just a few weeks she spent all the money. At the same time, the widow did not deny herself anything. Lived in an expensive hotel, ate in fashionable restaurants, bought brand-name clothes and cosmetics, pampered herself with jewelry. When Catherine returned home, she had only $900 left on her account. It also became known that she did not save available funds, as soon expected to receive insurance in $400,000. Additionally, she was entitled to child welfare money, $300 a month for each child. She was also entitled to a survivor benefit of $500 to $700 monthly for the rest of her life. Kat's profligacy was also confirmed by her aunt Carol Wiggins. She said that after her grandmother died, her niece inherited $25,000. When the money was in her possession, her eyes lit up like a rat in a cheese factory. That same day they went shopping. Catherine was not stingy, spending not only on herself, but also on Carol and her children. However, in just 3 weeks, she found herself with empty pockets. The circle of suspicion was closing more and more around the newly widowed. The police asked the insurance company not to make payments until the investigation was complete. Only Catherine probably didn't realize it. She contacted the insurer every day and complained about her hard life and debts. She even complained to her superiors. What she failed to mention was that she had just recently spent $100,000. New suspect. The detectives were getting more suspicious by the minute, but there was no direct evidence against Catherine and her boyfriend, so they decided to install a wiretap. It is the weight of the results. It became clear that the couple was nervous and hiding something. Michael and Catherine were afraid for their future, as soon as possible wanted to get insurance and leave the country. At the same time, neither of them mentioned their involvement in Corey's murder. Once in a conversation between them slipped the name of a certain David Runyon, who periodically made himself known. Then the investigators decided to shift the focus of the investigation to Morgantown, West Virginia, where this man lived. It turned out that he and Michael shared common ground. They were in clinical trials together at a research center. David himself is a former soldier and an experienced shooter who could easily get a gun and handle it professionally. 8 months after the murder of Voss, the guy was put under surveillance. His figure increasingly attracted the attention of investigators. Soon detectives got a search warrant for Runyon's house. Among the papers on the desk was a note with a shopping list. At first glance, the note did not appear to be anything special. However, drawing parallels to Corey's murder, it was thought-provoking. Among the usual items contained such items as a tarp, boots, a black hooded sweatshirt, and a knife. The 27-year-old himself didn't explain it in any way, only brushed off that there was nothing unusual for a man in the list. Also found was a .357 Magnum pistol. It was missing exactly 5 rounds, which corresponded to the number of shots fired at the naval officer. Next, the potential suspect's car was examined. Under the center console, specialists found a map with a dedicated route to Newport News and Corey's handwritten name. In the glove compartment were photos of Corey himself and his wife, Catherine. Following the search, David was taken into custody, and the gun found in the house was sent for ballistics testing. Later, the study showed that the gun was the murder weapon of Voss. During questioning, Runyon was restrained, but denied involvement in the crime and connection with Michael and Catherine. Afterwards, he refused to cooperate and asked for a lawyer. A confession. That's when the investigators pulled a trick. They did not hide the fact of David's detention and followed the reaction of the other suspects. During phone conversations between lovers, it was obvious that Michael was very scared. He even uttered a phrase that he was so scared that he was ready to throw himself off a bridge. The escape from justice did not suit the authorities, and they decided to detain the man. He was depressed and offered no resistance. During interrogation, they told him that it would be better if he confessed himself and ease his conscience. Draven then confessed to conspiring to kill Corey. He said that in January 2007, Catherine said that she wanted to divorce her husband, but at the same time, she noted that without his money it would be difficult to live. Then she suggested to Michael to eliminate the spouse and get insurance, which will provide them a trouble-free life. Since neither he nor she wanted to work, this idea seemed to him a way out of the situation. However, he was not capable of crime, so he decided to seek help from his acquaintance David Runyon, to whom he offered a reward of $20,000. The man agreed. The attackers coordinated their actions. In fact, Michael accomplished his task by finding a killer for Voss. Catherine's role was to put her husband's vigilance to sleep, organize a joint dinner, then send him to an ATM at night under false pretenses. So she helped lure her ex-lover into the hands of a criminal. The criminal himself, thoroughly prepared, purchased the necessary equipment and weapons, then sat in the car to the future victim and threatened with a gun. After that, he ordered to drive away to a place where there were no cameras and shot several times in cold blood. Regarding payment for the order, it was to be made upon receipt of insurance. Michael insisted that the executor had only received $275. That's why he often called Catherine and reminded her about the payment, and she in turn rushed the insurance agent. Perhaps David did not even realize that his customers have already received $100,000 and had time to spend them. The unfortunate victim. The only thing left to do was to get Catherine talking. To do that, the detectives pulled another stunt. They had Michael call her and tell her he'd been released. That way, she'd calm down and come get him. In reality, it turned out just as the officers had hoped. She didn't pick up the phone when the station called, but she did answer Michael's call. After that, Catherine showed up, satisfied with the favorable outcome of the case. However, soon her mood changed dramatically. She was arrested. The fact of surprise played into the hands of the investigation. Her Ukrainian accent somewhere disappeared, and the woman herself looked scared and confused. When she was told that Michael confessed to everything, she turned the tables on him. Catherine accused him of manipulation and organizing the crime. No one believed her, though. Catherine, like the other conspirators, was charged with first-degree murder. The prosecutor's office wanted to request the maximum possible punishment, the death penalty for the entire trio. This motivated the defendants to plea bargain with the prosecution in hopes of mitigating their punishment. Disappointing verdicts. In February 2008, Michael Draven made his first court appearance. He was found guilty of murder for hire, carjacking, and other related offenses. The man was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In the summer of that same year, it was David Runyon's turn. The man justified his act. Allegedly, before the crime, Michael assured him that Corey was a bad father. However, his words did not mitigate responsibility, and he was sentenced to death for the murder of a military man. The convict is currently awaiting execution on death row in a federal prison. Finally, the turn came to the main instigator of the crime. In November 2008, Catherine Voss was sentenced to 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole plus 20 years. Custody of Catherine and Corey Jr. was awarded to Corey's parents. During the trial, Barbara Wilson lamented that she in no way expected such a denouement in her son's fate. Bottom line, the love story of Corey and Catherine has a tragic ending. A triangle of 3 self-serving people ended in a brutal murder for a completely innocent man. Because human greed knows no limits, it spills over the blood like poison. It penetrates into souls, cripples them, and dries them up. Such vices must be suppressed in their infancy, otherwise the consequences can be monstrous. The life we live appears ordinary and measured: school, university, work, family, daily routine, a never-ending cycle of events. We live in our own world, paying little attention to what happens around us, watching news reports or TV shows about terrible incidents or crimes. We absorb the information without deeply engaging with it. What happened is horrific, we think, but it's far away and not our concern. Yet, evil is closer than it seems. Unfortunately, no one is completely safe from it. That's why it's important to cherish what we have. Even a simple, mundane life isn't the worst scenario. I believe the families of those who encountered the dark side of life would agree, and the victims themselves would give anything to avoid the nightmare they endured and have a chance at a healthy future. What have you heard about serial criminals and perpetrators? Mentally ill individuals, heartless villains, crazy geniuses. They manage to commit terrible crimes for a long time and remain unpunished. They hold entire neighborhoods and cities in fear. However, most of them eventually get caught. Some accidentally come to the attention of the police. Others leave clues intentionally, wanting to be caught. Such characters receive significant attention in literature and film. We pick up a book or watch a thriller to give ourselves a fright, but we always have the option to stop reading or turn off the movie. Unfortunately, this choice isn't available in real life for those who fall into their traps. There probably isn't a single country in the world that hasn't faced such a situation. The new criminal story will tell us about an unstable maniac who operated in Belgium. Ronald Janssen. Ronald Allen Janssen was born on February 6, 1971, in the city of Borcel, Limburg Province, Belgium. He was the third of 4 children in the family. His father worked as a miner and his mother as a housekeeper. From childhood, Ronnie realized he could only rely on himself. To escape poverty, he needed a push, and he decided that the best path to success would be through a future profession. So the teenager studied diligently. Teachers treated him well at school and distinguished him from others. This, of course, didn't please his peers. At home, relations with his parents left much to be desired. Mr. Janssen had a bad temper and often lashed out at his family. As Ronnie grew older, he realized this behavior was abnormal and left home. After some time, his mother and the other children followed his example. Thanks to his knowledge, our protagonist easily got into a university in Hasselt. Later, he changed his mind about his chosen major and transferred to Leuven, where he studied engineering. Since money was tight, he actively worked part-time during his studies and helped his family. Finally, in 1993, he earned his long-awaited ticket to life, a diploma in industrial engineering with honors. That same year, Ronald met a girl. Natalie was 3 years older than him, born in the Netherlands. However, the age and cultural differences didn't bother the couple at all. They liked each other immediately and started dating. In 1995, the couple married. The following year, they moved to Genk, where
where his wife got a job offer. The head of the family also found work quickly, as his skills were in demand everywhere. He took a job as a technical and production manager. In 1998, Ronnie unexpectedly changed fields and started teaching mechanics and computer science at a local school. It must be said that he excelled in this area as well. He was respected and recognized. Everyone considered Jansen an educated and intelligent man, easy to talk to. In 2000, the family moved again, this time to Halen, where Ronald began teaching computer science, economics, and applied mechanics. As for his personal life, it initially seemed to be going well. Our protagonist didn't want to repeat his father's mistakes, so he tried to remain calm in his relationships. He and his wife dreamed of having a large family. In 1998, their first daughter was born, and 3 years later, their second. However, the arrival of children played a fatal role. You see, Ronald had suffered from chronic insomnia his whole life.
With the birth of his daughters, his sleep problems worsened. Due to the constant crying and noise in the house, Ronald became irritable. The couple began to have misunderstandings and arguments. To cope with his condition and the growing tension, the head of the family often went for walks to get some fresh air. Eventually, the marriage began to fall apart. In 2006, Natalie left him, taking the children with her. Many acquaintances noted that Ronald changed after the divorce. He became quiet, withdrawn, and possibly depressed. Neighbors often saw him walking alone at night. However, the respected professor explained it as a sleep disorder. Although his behavior seemed strange, it didn't cause much alarm. Nevertheless, on January 4, 2010, there was a knock on Jansen's door. Fire on the highway. The reason for visiting Ronald was a recent incident. On a highway near the city of Diest, a car, an Opel Corsa, caught fire. On January 3rd at 2:43 a.m., a call was made to emergency services. When firefighters arrived at the scene, they discovered people inside the burning vehicle. Unfortunately, they couldn't be saved. The bodies of the two individuals were sent for examination. However, unexpected circumstances emerged during the autopsy. Using dental records, the bodies were identified. It was determined that 18-year-old Shauna Appletans and 22-year-old Kevin Paulus lost their lives due to gunshot wounds long before the fire occurred. This means someone ended the lives of the young people and then set the car on fire to cover their tracks. The double crime disturbed the local residents, who feared going out at night or letting their children play outside. They connected the incident to the crime of a young girl 3 years earlier. They demanded an immediate investigation to find and punish the criminal. The police were also eager to start the investigation and reassure the public. Many questions arose. Who were Kevin Paulus and Shauna Appletans? Who was responsible for their deaths and why? And perhaps the most pressing, was there a connection between this crime and the other incident? The disappearance of Anik. The small town of Diest was deeply upset that the tragic passing of 18-year-old Anik van Eitzel had remained unsolved for so long. Anik disappeared on April 27, 2007, after attending a Catholic party. She was a modest, kind girl, a diligent student, and a loyal friend. On that ill-fated Friday, she went with friends to the suburbs. The event she planned to attend was different from the popular ones for her age group. People of all ages attended, from children to adults. Everyone gathered to sing, dance, play games, and socialize. In general, this party had a purely safe and educational format. There was no alcohol or prohibited substances. Her friends recalled that Anik was her usual self that evening, cheerful and sociable. At 4 a.m., everyone dispersed. Like many others, Anik headed home on her bicycle. However, she never made it. Her worried parents began calling her cell phone, but no one answered. There was no word from her, which was unusual for Anik. Later, her friends told when and where they last saw her, but their words didn't bring comfort. The road went through a forest. Initially, they rode together, but their paths diverged at an intersection. She hadn't been seen since. Family and friends participated in the search. When their efforts failed, the Van Eitzel family turned to the police. Detectives began the investigation immediately. 70 police officers, 200 volunteers, and a rescue helicopter joined the search. At the same time, every possible scenario was considered. Close associates and all party attendees were questioned. It was discovered that Anik got along well with her family, so the possibility of her running away from home was ruled out right away. Additionally, she didn't have a boyfriend with whom she might have left. On the surface, there were no apparent reasons for her to end her life either. She had no enemies, no issues, and no psychological disorders. The event attendees didn't notice anything suspicious. None of them seemed suspect. Locals living near the disappearance site didn't see the girl described. Time passed, but Anik, along with her bicycle, remained missing. The route she took was thoroughly analyzed, and every surveillance camera along it was reviewed. The entire area was searched extensively. It was as if she and her bicycle had vanished into thin air. Thus, the police concluded that the missing girl had likely fallen victim to a crime. At the same time, they were struck by the complete lack of evidence. There were no traces of the missing girl, none of her belongings, nor signs of a struggle. Perhaps she was kidnapped, and soon someone would demand a ransom. But even that didn't happen. The hope of finding her alive was quickly fading. However, when flyers with her photo were posted everywhere and her parents spoke to the media, new details emerged. Several people contacted the police, reporting that on the night of April 27th, they heard suspicious screams in the forest. However, they couldn't see anything in the dark. Data from Anik's cell phone also raised false hopes. It was determined that the phone had been turned on and off several times that night and the following morning. The locations where the device was traced were checked, but nothing was found there either. The body and the bicycle. The girl's body was discovered a week later. A passerby in Lummen near the Albert Canal noticed a suspicious package floating on the water while on a walk along the embankment and immediately reported it to the police. The discovery was indeed suspicious, as the package contained a woman's body, carefully wrapped and weighted down with stones to prevent it from surfacing. However, the person who did this didn't account for the strong current and the process of decomposition. Since the body had been in the water for a long time, identifying the woman was difficult. Nevertheless, dental records confirmed the specialists' suspicions. There was no doubt that the woman found was the missing Anik van Oytsel. The autopsy revealed that the cause of her death was a blunt force trauma to the head. Additionally, it was discovered that she had been taken advantage of. The location where her body was found was 16 miles away from where she had disappeared, indicating that the criminal transported the victim to cover their tracks. It seemed that her body might have contained some clues about her tormentor, but no evidence was found. If her bicycle had been found, it might have yielded fingerprints of the perpetrator. Unfortunately, this didn't go as planned either. Several months later, the missing bicycle was found in Leuven, about 50 miles from the scene. The bicycle had been hidden in a secluded spot. The culprit had repainted and thoroughly cleaned it, leaving no traces. The news of Anik's tragic death was devastating. Many had hoped until the end that she would be found alive. For her parents, accepting what happened was unbearable. However, the desire to find the criminal and bring them to justice gave them the strength to keep going. It must be said that after many years, the moment of retribution finally came. A false lead. Initially, there were doubts about the identity of Kevin Paulus, the owner of the burned car. The investigation revealed some interesting facts. First, the young man was well known to the police. He had been involved in multiple fights in the past. By a strange coincidence, Anik's bicycle was found in the city where Shana, the other victim, lived. Some even speculated that they might have known each other. This led to the theory that Kevin himself could have been the criminal, possibly ending Anik's life first and then, years later, doing the same to Shana before setting the car on fire and ending his own life. However, this assumption was short-lived. There was no direct evidence, and it was later revealed that the young man hadn't taken his own life but had been brutally deprived of it. The authorities faced a long and challenging investigation. The circumstances of the deaths were horrifying. If both incidents were connected, it meant a serial criminal was involved. The profile of such a person was concerning, intelligent enough to dispose of evidence effectively and cunning enough to remain undetected. This type of criminal is among the most difficult to catch. It takes a lot of time and effort to apprehend them, during which the perpetrator could find another victim. A lead. To learn more about the murdered couple, detectives met with their family and friends, but they provided no information of significant interest to the investigation. The detectives then decided to question the neighbors. The residents mentioned that the young couple lived together, but noticed nothing suspicious on the night of January 2nd to 3rd. However, they did mention a conflict between the victims and another neighbor. According to them, Shauna often quarreled with this seemingly nice man for some reason and would openly express her negative feelings toward him. Kevin would frequently stand up for her. Once, their argument almost escalated into a full-blown fight, but bystanders intervened and the scuffle was stopped. Investigators decided to speak with this suspicious neighbor, and on January 4, 2010, a knock was heard at the apartment of Ronald Allen Jansen, the professor. The door was opened by a middle-aged man who didn't raise any concerns. He hospitably welcomed the detectives, listened to them, and provided explanations regarding the conflict with the neighboring couple. Ronald admitted that he did occasionally endure Shauna's taunts and Kevin's attacks, but he chalked it up to their youth. When asked where he was on January 2nd, he explained that he was home watching TV. Unfortunately, no one could confirm his alibi. At the same time, Ronnie made it clear that he wasn't involved in what happened to his adversaries and didn't feel any satisfaction or desire for revenge. However, something in his words raised doubts. Moreover, Jansen denied ever being involved in a fight, as he considered himself a well-mannered and respected person who wasn't capable of such behavior. As is often the case, appearances can be deceiving. Despite his outward image, the 39-year-old professor was arrested. Later, a search of his home uncovered a gun hidden in a large bag of cat food. After this unexpected discovery, his behavior changed. During the next interrogation, he was nervous and couldn't explain where the weapon came from. When investigators changed their interrogation tactics, Ronald began to break down. This led to the revelation of the horrific details of the crimes committed by the serial criminal who earned the nickname the Professor. The crime against Kevin and Shauna. Ronnie confessed that on the evening of January 2nd, he couldn't sleep as usual, so he went outside to get some air. While walking, a car with Shauna and Kevin inside pulled up near the house. The hateful neighbors started mocking and insulting him. Unable to endure it, he went back to his apartment, retrieved a gun and a can of gasoline, but by the time he returned, the neighbors had left. He then decided to go to their home and knocked on the door. Shauna opened it. Showing the weapon, he ordered her to be quiet and called for Kevin. He then threatened to end their lives if they didn't drive him to a location he specified. The frightened young couple obeyed, went downstairs, got into the car, and drove out of town. Kevin was behind the wheel, while Shauna sat behind him, effectively trapping her as there were no rear doors. She cried and pleaded for their release, but Ronnie was unmoved. He sat next to the driver, keeping the gun trained on him. In a deserted area, the car stopped. Jansen then shot Kevin twice in the head, ending his life instantly. He then threw Kevin's body out of the car and drove over it. Shauna was crying and begging for her life. In response, the criminal told her he would spare her if she agreed to engage in intimacy with him. The girl complied, but he later went back on his word, deciding it wasn't wise to leave a witness alive. He shot her and dragged Kevin's lifeless body back into the car. Then he drove closer to their home and set the car on fire. Ronald returned through the field, arriving back at 4 a.m. He carefully washed, removed his soiled clothes, and burned them. He then disposed of the ashes in a ditch and hid the gun in the cat food, where it was eventually found. He hadn't managed to dispose of the weapon because he didn't expect to be caught so soon. Ronald insisted that his actions were a matter of honor, claiming that he was defending himself and putting an end to the constant harassment. His words had some validity, as it was later revealed during psychiatric evaluations that certain childhood events, which he had never spoken about, had significantly affected him. Ronnie's childhood. Young Ronnie was often bullied at school, mocked for his lisp. One day, he couldn't take the teasing anymore and fought back, beating his tormentor with a bat. As a result, he was suspended from school. To prevent further conflicts, Mrs. Jansen transferred her son to another school, where he was treated with understanding. However, the hardships didn't end there. The truth is, Ronald also faced mistreatment from his father. This led to a deep fear of being at home and insomnia, which plagued him for the rest of his life. The defendant admitted that at one point he decided to end it all, to take his own life. But he changed his mind, feeling sorry for his mother, who would be left alone. Instead, he decided to eliminate the source of his misery. A plan formed in his mind. His father suffered from diabetes and took insulin injections. Ronnie replaced the medication with another dangerous substance. As a result, his tormentor almost died, but was saved just in time. It was clear to the father whose doing it was. However, he did not go to the police, but instead started to torment his son even more. After that, the young man decided to run away from home. Apparently, the criminal's troubled mind underwent significant changes at a young age, making it impossible for him to tolerate any form of abuse. However, later, it became clear that Jansen's anger was directed not only at his tormentors, but also at innocent people. The crime of Anik. In a shocking turn, Ronald confessed to the crime of Anik, committed in 2007. According to him, she became an unintended victim. That night, he couldn't sleep and decided to drive to another town. Along the way, he encountered a beautiful girl on a bicycle. He wanted to get to know her better, but he chose a poor way to approach her. He blocked her path. Naturally, the girl was frightened, got off her bike, and started to run. Jansen got angry, chased her down, tied her hands, and threatened her with a gun. He then forced her into his car and took her to his home. Ronnie promised to let Anik go if she didn't cause any trouble. The suspect claimed he didn't intend to take advantage of or deprive the girl of her life. He just wanted her to stay with him for a while. By morning, he planned to let her go. However, when he was alone with the girl, his plans changed. He realized he couldn't do what he had told her because she would tell everyone. So, Ronald beat her, took advantage of her, and finally struck her with a hammer. He then disposed of her body by placing it in a bag filled with rocks and throwing it into a canal. When the cold-blooded suspect returned home, he cleaned everything with cleaning agents and destroyed all evidence. His words about just wanting to spend the night with Anik sounded unconvincing. It was clear that the criminal knew exactly what he was doing and understood the consequences. Thus, when he kidnapped the girl, he knew he would end her life. Intimate predator. Later, Ronald confessed to 3 additional assaults he committed while studying in Leuven. However, he couldn't remember the faces of the women or the dates of the incidents. In total, during the investigation, he admitted to 5 similar episodes. Nevertheless, the investigation suggested a different number. He was accused of 20 assaults that occurred between 2001 and 2010 in student dormitories. The suspect would break in through a window, attack, and threaten with a knife. Afterward, he would proceed with intimate acts without any resistance. Additionally, it was believed he could have been involved in a series of 10 crimes committed in 1991, as the method was similar. However, this remains speculation without substantial evidence. The trial. On September 20th, 2011, the defendant stood trial. Zvonimir Miskovich, Ronald's lawyer, tried to mitigate his responsibility by highlighting the positive aspects of his character and his difficult childhood. None of his acquaintances could believe that quiet Ronnie had turned out to be such a monster. His 63-year-old mother testified that she had never seen her son chasing women and considered him a good person. During a visit, he confessed to me that all the crimes happened in moments of madness, she said. I'm devastated, but Ronnie is still my boy. I have to be there for him, no matter how hard it is. Ronald's ex-wife also testified that she had a good relationship with him and trusted him with their children twice a week. I always thought he was a kind and gentle person, she said. This criminal is not the person I knew. The prosecution sought the maximum possible sentence for the defendant. The prosecutor emphasized that they were dealing with a dangerous psychopath, a serial predator, and a criminal who has no place among normal people. Finally, on October 21, 2011, Ronald Jansen was found guilty of the crimes against Anik, Shayna, and Kevin, including their abduction and the assaults on the women with the use of torture. The mitigating circumstances mentioned by the defense were not considered. The court sentenced the defendant to life imprisonment. Controversial justice. On September 10, 2012, Ronald was found guilty of 12 assaults committed with the threat of using a weapon, multiple attempts on life, as well as torture and barbarism. However, given the previous sentence, the new verdict did not add any additional punishment. One might think that a life sentence is a fair judgment for a mass criminal. Unfortunately, practice in Belgium suggests otherwise. Offenders with such sentences spend between 15 to 23 years behind bars and are then released. In fact, by 2026, Jansen could be eligible for parole and continue his bloody crimes. It seems the professor was aware of this, which is why he smiled during the trial and showed no remorse for the sentence he received. How well do you know your exes, and do you have any idea what they are really capable of? Often, even those people with whom we have lived for years under a common roof, we can never fully get to know. The scariest thing is that when they break up or after it, they can show their worst qualities and the darkest side of their soul, directing all the anger and hatred at the once beloved person. The story of Gladys Rickard is a true example of the realization of the American dream. An immigrant from the Dominican Republic, without money, connections, and language skills, in a foreign country, received a brilliant education and independently built a dizzying career, going from dishwasher to chief accountant of a large company. In relations with the opposite sex, Gladys has always been very cautious and selective, because in her youth, burned, remaining a single mother. As a mature, established woman, she seemed to have met a worthy man with whom they were alike in every way. But Rickard had no idea that this intelligent, stately, and respected man would become her biggest nightmare and cut her life short on her happiest day. Who was Gladys Rickard? Gladys Maria Rickard was born in 1960, December 19th, in a small province of the Dominican Republic, and was the youngest of 3 children in the family. She was raised with an older sister named Norma and brother Juan. Her parents worked hard to provide their heirs with a better life than the one they lived themselves. In the mid-70s, Norma, who was just over 20 years old at the time, emigrated to the United States and settled in New York City, where she was able to find a good job and establish herself. Gladys dreamed of following her sister's example and moving to America in search of a better life. She studied diligently at school and was one of the best students in her class. However, as a teenager, she started dating a guy from her school who was her first love. At the age of 17, she became pregnant, and the boyfriend, learning about it, refused to continue the relationship and simply stopped communicating with her. But Gladys immediately decided that she would keep the child and will bring him up independently, and her parents supported her in this. At the age of 18, she gave birth to a son, whom she named Davis. Gladys was still living in the home of her parents, who helped her a lot with the baby, while the young mother worked hard to save money to move to New York to live with her older sister. It took her almost 4 years, but even then, her savings were not enough to take her son with her right away. A new life, in a foreign country. It was not until the summer of 1982 that Gladys realized her dream and flew to the United States. She settled in Manhattan, in the house where her sister Norma and her family lived. The girl immediately began to study English, and at the same time took on any job and part-time work just to avoid sitting on the neck of her relatives and not to abuse their hospitality. Gladys washed dishes in the evening in restaurants, handed out advertising brochures on the streets, sorted and laid out goods on the shelves of the supermarket. As soon as her English level allowed, she went to college, continuing to work several jobs in parallel. After another year, she got a job as an accountant in one of the New York companies, and after graduating from college, the girl entered a prestigious university at the Faculty of Economics. By 1985, Gladys had a good and promising job that brought a stable income. She was still studying at the university, but she had already rented a separate apartment and was saving money to buy her own place. Now she could take her young son from the Dominican Republic, where he still lived with his grandparents, and move him in with her. After earning her degree, Rickard's career took a rapid turn for the better. She became chief accountant of a large travel company, the main office of which was located in Manhattan, was considered a first-class and indispensable employee. By that time, she had already mastered native English, and she even managed to get rid of her accent almost completely.
After a couple more years, Gladys and Norma worked together to take their brother Juan and his wife and 3 daughters, as well as their elderly parents, to New York. They all settled in Manhattan and socialized closely with each other. The brother also found a good job, learned the language, and gradually advanced in his career. The children attended prestigious schools, and in general, the fates of all members of the large family were quite favorable. They kept in touch, came to help if any of them needed it, and knew everything about what was going on in the families of each of them. Perfect stranger. By the early 90s, Gladys had achieved just about everything she could dream of. She had a good high-paying job, she rented a spacious apartment in a good neighborhood, her son attended a prestigious school, loved ones were close by and did not need anything, and the girl herself with confidence in the future. Only to build her own personal happiness, she has not yet been able to. It should be noted that Rickard, after her first failed experience of relationships when she was left alone with a child in her arms, without money and education, now very carefully approached the choice of a partner. The young Dominican worked hard to provide a decent life for herself and Davis. She tried not to miss any opportunity, and all the time improving in everything she did. Colleagues, as well as many friends and acquaintances, Gladys considered her a careerist, and were almost certain that she would sacrifice personal happiness for new success in the professional field. She really rarely went on dates and was always more focused on work. Nevertheless, she never stopped dreaming of meeting a reliable man, getting married, having a full-fledged family, and being happy. Rickard did not have her own car, and always got to work on the subway, where one warm autumn morning she met the perfect, as it seemed to her man. It was 41-year-old Agustin Garcia, who was able to charm her at first sight. He gave Gladys a seat, was polite and gallant, and when another seat became available, he sat down next to her, and they had a casual conversation. The man seemed witty, erudite, joked amusingly, and complimented her. In addition, it turned out that Agustin had also once immigrated to America from the Dominican Republic, so he and Gladys had a lot in common. Before saying goodbye, the new acquaintances exchanged phone numbers to keep in touch, and from that moment on, their romance began. Who is Agustin Garcia? Agustin Garcia, as already mentioned, was also a native of the Dominican Republic, where he was born in February 1951. His childhood was difficult and full of hardship. He grew up in poverty. His native father never knew, and after the death of his mother decided that he had to radically change his life. In the mid-70s, he emigrated to the United States, and there he literally chewed his way to a happy future. The man worked hard, learned the language, and as soon as he got a little on his feet, began to actively help his compatriots, who, like him, moved to the United States in search of a better life. Augustine, more than anyone else, understood how hard it is to get a foothold in a foreign country and to make a name for yourself, so he provided comprehensive assistance in finding a job, housing, learning the language, and so on. In the 80s, Garcia became one of the leaders of a large Dominican community in New York State. He was a prominent and influential figure, successfully developed his own business, and the office of his company was located in the central part of Manhattan. The man owned his own 2-story house, located in an elite neighborhood, several expensive cars, and a yacht. He managed to be married but divorced, and now independently raised 2 sons, sole custody of which he achieved through the court. Garcia gained fame as a kind, sympathetic, and generous man, and since he occupied a prominent place in the largest community, he was constantly asked for help, and he did not refuse to help anyone. He was ready to personally receive and listen to everyone, and often even treated compatriots and their children at his own expense.
In 1985, Agustin became the head of the Dominican Chamber of Commerce in New York and also managed several other large organizations associated with the Dominican Republic. At the same time, he was engaged in charitable work and carried out large-scale social activities. Thanks to his assistance, several schools and kindergartens were opened, as well as a training center for learning English and an employment center for the employment of immigrants. Usually, Agustin never used the subway, but that day his car was being repaired and he was in a hurry to get to an important meeting. He wanted to use another car or call a cab, but the city was in a huge traffic jam, and the subway was the only way to get to the place he needed in time. It was there that he had their fateful, though perhaps more correctly fatal, meeting with Gladys. She thought it was fate, but it turned out to be an evil fate. A slender, well-groomed woman in an expensive business suit immediately attracted Augustin's attention. He decided to take the initiative and was the first to make contact. Almost immediately, they found out that they were compatriots, and both made a lot of effort to make their way in a country foreign to them. Agustin asked Gladys for her phone number and left her his business card, on which he had also written his personal home number. Garcia had been thinking about the beautiful stranger all day, and that evening, when he got home, he called her. He invited her to have dinner with him at a restaurant that weekend, and she accepted without hesitation. The man seemed perfect in every way. He was kind, intelligent, well-educated, generous, courteous, caring, and listened attentively to everything she said. Agustin behaved like a real gentleman, seemed very gallant and polite. In addition, their fates were very similar, because both were immigrants, started from the bottom, both had failed relationships, and now they were raising children on their own. The relationship between Rickard and Garcia developed rapidly. They called every day, and all free time tried to spend together. Augustin beautifully looked after his girlfriend, gave her luxurious bouquets of flowers and expensive gifts, took her to exquisite restaurants, did not skimp on compliments. He quickly found a common language with Gladys's relatives and got along with her son. All members of Gladys's family were very happy for her and believed that she had finally found her happiness. Agustin's children also accepted their father's new friend well, and a year after the relationship began, he asked Gladys to move in with him and live together. Rickard was over the moon. She and Davis moved out of the rented apartment and moved into a huge house, Garcia. But from that moment, the problems began. The man's sons from his first marriage, who lived with him, were older than Gladys's son and constantly hurt the boy. Teenagers systematically provoked conflicts, and sometimes it came to fights. Despite the fact that Agustin's children were wrong and were always the instigators of disputes, the father in every situation took their side. According to the memories of Gladys's family, she at that time, more than ever, dreamed of marriage and waited for her boyfriend to propose. She begged her son to avoid conflicts with Augustine's children, and the boy tried, but the Garcia sons enjoyed bullying him, so they did not give him a day's rest. Gladys realized how difficult it was for Davis, who was also entering adolescence, and she feared that the tension in the house would have a negative impact on his future life. So she decided to talk seriously with Agustin, but he did not see in what was happening any problem, believed that the children themselves and everything will sort it out, and refused to influence the behavior of their children. After weighing the pros and cons, Gladys realized that she was not ready to risk the well-being of her only son, and therefore decided to move out of Garcia's house. The man took to what was happening with understanding, but noted that he would not want to break off the relationship. He rented a separate spacious house for his girlfriend and her son, and the couple continued to meet, but the nature of their relationship was rapidly changing. Tyrant and possessive. Almost immediately after the couple separated and began living apart, Agustin began to show signs of controlling behavior. He insisted that Gladys be in touch at all times, so he could call her home or office at any time and have her pick up the phone. The man also began to look at her surroundings, scrutinizing who she socialized with on and off the job. At first, Garcia was gentle but persistent. He questioned his friend in detail about where and with whom she was, what she was talking about, how her day was going, and so on. In other respects, however, their relationship was much as before. Augustine, as before, gave his girlfriend flowers and jewelry, took her to restaurants, and took her to resorts. Rickard's family already considered him practically a member of their family, and she herself was still waiting for a marriage proposal. Years went by. Agustin turned into a real tyrant and possessive, in every possible way limited Gladys's freedom, trying to control her every step. He was obviously not going to marry her. Gladys asked the question, and it became clear that marriage was not in the man's plans at all. He stated that he had already had a failed marriage, and so he did not want to marry again. Gladys hoped that Augustine would change his mind and was in no hurry to end the relationship she had spent so many years of her life on. It soon became clear, however, that Garcia was having occasional affairs or flings on the side, trying to hide it from Gladys, whom he presented as his wife in high society. When Rickard found out about her boyfriend's cheating, she tried to break up with him, but he literally went berserk, pulled out a gun, and threatened to kill her rather than let her leave. At that moment, she realized what kind of monster she had been meeting all this time, and realized that she had to run away from him as fast as possible. But fear for her life kept Gladys from leaving for about another year. Only in November 1998, after Rickard, visiting the office of Garcia, literally caught him cheating, she firmly declared that now, between them, irrevocably, all over. The man did not try to justify himself, and did not believe that Gladys could really leave him. However, just a few days later, she moved out of the house he rented and also informed her family of the breakup. New love and the pursuit of an ex. At first, Agustin made desperate attempts to get his ex-girlfriend back. He constantly called her and offered to meet, left on the doorstep of her new home bouquets of flowers, gifts, notes with declarations of love, and even a Bible. However, Gladys no longer succumbed to his manipulations and was not going to resume relations with him. In February 1999, Rickard met in one of the popular restaurants with a man whose name was James Preston. He was also an accountant by profession, and his free time devoted to his hobby, writing music. A mutual sympathy arose between them at first sight, and soon they began dating. Gladys had no idea that her ex was still following her closely and literally looking in her windows. One day, when James and Gladys were spending time together at her house, there was a knock on the door and Agustin stood on the doorstep and demanded to speak to her ex-girlfriend face to face. When she refused and asked him to leave, the man went into a rage and started throwing stones at the windows. Frightened, Rickard called the police but did not press charges against Garcia, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. In the summer of 1999, Preston offered Gladys to become his lawful wedded wife, and she willingly agreed. Wedding couple decided to play on September 26th, and after going to Hawaii, arranging a honeymoon on a paradise island. The lovers began to prepare for the celebration, invited friends and relatives, and it seemed that nothing could prevent their happiness. On September 12th, 2 weeks before the wedding, Gladys went shopping at the mall. There, she ran into Agustin, who was following her. He put his arm around her waist as if they were still a couple and offered to escort her. Knowing her ex's temper, she didn't resist, but quickly remembered the urgent matter at hand and hurried away.
A brutal murder on the wedding day. On her wedding day, Gladys was the happiest bride, clad in the lush white gown she had always dreamed of. Dozens of friends and relatives gathered at her home in Ridgefield to share in the joyous moment. The groom was waiting for Gladys at the church while she finished her final preparations and was about to leave for him. 2 professional photographers were working at the house, and several video cameras were set up so as not to miss anything important for the future family archive. Soon, however, the footage was being viewed not with the family, but in the courtroom where the murder case was being heard. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a car driven by Agustin pulled up to the house and stopped on the opposite side of the street. A man got out and headed toward the house, but was blocked by Juan, who asked him to leave. Garcia, however, said he was invited to the celebration, so the bride's brother backed off. As the happy bride was handing out bouquets to her nieces, Agustin entered the room. He went straight to Gladys, grabbed a .38 caliber pistol from his briefcase, and fired 3 shots at very close range. The first bullet hit her in the shoulder, the second in the chest, and the third in the head, leaving Rickard no chance of escape. The bride died on the spot, and the medics who arrived could only state her death. The killer didn't even try to escape, and was apprehended at the scene. He looked calm and seemed ready to confess, but he was not remorseful at all. Perpetrator or victim? During the first interrogation, the male detainee admitted that he did not know about Gladys's wedding. Moreover, he was allegedly sure that he was still dating her, because a couple of weeks ago they were walking around the mall in an embrace. According to Agustin, he drove by Gladys's house every day, and that day, seeing a large number of people in cars, he decided to stop and wonder what was going on there. When he learned that his friend was marrying another man, he decided to talk to her and went to the house. According to him, in the living room where the bride was, he was suddenly attacked by her brother and son, and he pulled out a gun to defend himself, but the bullets accidentally hit Gladys. Garcia, however, claimed that he did not remember the shooting. When the detainee's lawyers arrived at the station, he retracted his initial statement and kept silent. He was offered to admit his guilt and cooperate with the investigation in order to receive a lighter sentence, but the man refused. This high-profile case was taken up by the best human rights defenders who sought to win it at any cost and make a name for themselves. The best defense is, as we know, an offense, so experienced lawyers decided to make Garcia look like a victim in this whole situation. The trial was scheduled for October 2001, so the defense had plenty of time to prepare. Since the image of a good man created by the businessman collapsed in an instant, and in the eyes of others he was now a real monster, to restore his good name seemed difficult. The lawyers immediately started working with the press, giving interviews and organizing press conferences. They worked on several fronts at once, making Gladys look like a greedy woman and a cheater who had broken Agustin's heart. At the same time, the lawyers claimed that their client was attacked by the brother and son of the deceased, and Garcia grabbed a gun to defend himself, but accidentally fatally wounded his ex-girlfriend. According to human rights activists, the deceased had an affair with James while still in a relationship with their client. Allegedly, she deceived Garcia, planning her wedding behind his back, while continuing to accept gifts and money from him. According to them, The murder was manslaughter, occurred in a state of passion, and because of the attack by Juan and Davis.
As soon as this information was actively circulated in the media, the public sided with the perpetrator, believing that Gladys got what she deserved for her cheating and abuse of Agustine's kindness. The victim's family came forward to defend her honor, but the perpetrator's lawyers seemed to have gotten their way. The murder was caught on videotape. On what was to be the happiest day of Gladys's life, photographers and a videographer were invited to the celebration. They filmed every moment of the bride's preparation, and in the living room there was a camera that recorded the last preparations. It was this camera that captured the gruesome moment of the massacre of a defenseless woman. Garcia, blinded by rage, clearly did not notice the camera. The footage showed him walking towards the bride, grabbing a gun from his briefcase and shooting her 3 times at point-blank range. All the arguments of the lawyers collapsed like a house of cards because next to the criminal was not Juan or Davis, who allegedly attacked him, and he himself moved confidently toward his victim and aimed only at her. Upon learning of such important evidence, Augustine's attorneys began to insist that the tape should not be shown to the jury. However, the judge, after reviewing the tape, denied the defense's motion, admitting the video to the case file. Trial and a fair verdict. Gladys Rickard's murder trial began in the fall of 2001. Relatives and friends of the victim claimed that Agustine stalked her after their separation and tried to poison her life in every possible way. But she, because of her soft character, did not report him to the police, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. The decisive argument in this case was the same videotape, which dispelled the last doubts. On February 1, 2002, Garcia was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of being eligible for parole after 30 years. The man tried to appeal, claiming that he was shocked after learning of Gladys's wedding, which led to temporary insanity. However, his appeal was rejected. One-man show. Every crime is unthinkable and monstrous. However, some atrocities defy the slightest explanation and comprehension. They shock with their cruelty, recklessness, and lack of principles. I dare say you have never heard anything like this before. This new story takes us to Costa Mesa, California, USA. The prosecutor in the case stated that everything turned out differently than it seemed. Even the craziest Hollywood screenwriters couldn't have come up with such an ending, confessed Matt Murphy in an interview. Double disappearance. The events involve several people. The key figures are 26-year-old Samuel Hare and 23-year-old Julie Kibuishi. The young people disappeared on May 21, 2010. Their families sounded the alarm when they heard nothing from them the next day. By midday, the Kibuishi family contacted the police, reporting that their daughter was not answering calls or messages. However, the police responded that Julie was an adult and didn't have to check in, especially over the weekend, and suggested waiting a bit longer. Unfortunately, a few hours later, the family's fears were confirmed. The police reported that the young woman was no longer alive. Stephen Hare, Sam's father, often visited his son. After serving in Afghanistan, Sam exhibited symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Although not officially diagnosed, his parents were concerned. They called, invited him over, or visited him themselves. They hadn't heard from Sam for 2 days, and he even missed a planned dinner, which was unusual for the former military man known for his responsibility and discipline. His family had a bad feeling, so Mr. Hare decided to check on his son. The door to his apartment was open, heightening his concern. As he entered, it initially seemed the place was empty. But soon, Steve realized someone was in the bedroom. Approaching closer, he saw a young woman lying on the bed. Her pants were torn, and there was a message written in marker on her back. "All yours, damn it." The stranger was motionless and appeared to be lifeless. The bedding was stained with blood, and bullet wounds marred the back of her head. Realizing something terrible had occurred, the man called emergency services. Paramedics confirmed severe head injuries and, consequently, the young woman's demise. Later, her identity was confirmed as Julie Kibuishi.
Her purse and documents were on the kitchen table. While specialists examined the crime scene, Mr. Hare searched the apartment for his son, fearing he too might be in danger. Despite the apparent circumstances, he couldn't believe Sam was involved. His parental intuition told him Sam couldn't have done this. Most likely his home was attacked, and he was taken. Original version. Unlike the father, the police held a different opinion. Law enforcement officers considered the young man a likely suspect. Being a former military member, he was well versed in handling firearms and might have had a gun in his possession. It was possible that an argument occurred between the young people, during which he lost control and deprived the girl of life. It's also well known that after military service, soldiers' mental health can be precarious. However, Sam's family stated that he had quickly adjusted to civilian life and did not exhibit aggression. Nonetheless, his relatives did not hide the fact that they supported him in every way possible after his return from service, even keeping spare keys and having access to his personal account just in case. Close friends. Samuel Hare was in the military and was known for his positive traits. Kind-hearted, a man of his word, and a loyal friend. In 2010, he returned home on a doctor's recommendation. Being frugal, he had saved about $60,000 during his service. He settled down and built a life. Sam dreamed of continuing his military career and earning an officer's rank, which led him to enroll in Orange Coast College with ease. There, the new student made friends. An aspiring designer. The young people studied anthropology together, quickly becoming friends and spending time together. Despite Julie being an only child, she was not spoiled. Her family described her as a cheerful and responsive girl, interested in dance and student theater. It was well known that there was no romantic relations. The combat veteran had been in a long-term relationship with a girl named Katharina. Living in Germany, the couple visited each other frequently. They took turns staying at each other's homes. Katharina was set to graduate the following year, after which they planned to move in together and marry. Julie was also in a relationship. Her significant other lived in Japan, and they regularly communicated via the internet. The main characters of this story were like brother and sister, supporting and helping each other. All the more shocking, especially since Julie's body was found under unmistakable circumstances. It gave the impression she had been taken advantage of, tarnishing Sam's previously impeccable reputation with suspicion. Moreover, something unexpected soon came to light. In his teenage years, Sam was suspected in a crime. According to police records, a young man had been brutally beaten by a group and later succumbed to his injuries. Members of a rival gang were suspected in the attack, and Sam was believed to have been among them. However, all charges dropped, yet Sam spent an entire year under investigation. This fact solidified police suspicions of his propensity for violence and dubious connections to the criminal world. Investigation. While some police officers were focused on searching for the young man, others were piecing together the sequence of events. Officers were aided by Julie's mobile phone, found in her purse. By examining the device, they discovered that the young people had been in communication throughout the day. At 2:45 p.m., Sam mentioned he had gone to a friend's place to help with something, without going into details. He also shared with his friend that he planned a weekend trip out of town. However, around 11 p.m., he sent another text. Sam wanted to meet up and seemed upset. He asked Julie to come over around midnight to talk. That evening, Julie was meeting with her cousin and his fiancé. They had dinner at a restaurant and discussed the upcoming wedding, where Julie was to be a bridesmaid. After receiving Sam's message, she hurried over. Upon arriving, Julie sent her last text message, informing her brother she had arrived and mentioned hearing sobbing behind the door. Unaware of the danger, she walked into a deadly trap. Detectives believed Sam returned home under the influence, perhaps troubled by something and wanting to vent. Since Katharina wasn't around, he reached out to his college friend. During the conversation, something went wrong, causing him to become angry and attack the young woman. However, one thing remained unclear. If he sought intimacy, why end her life?
There was nothing indicating that Julie resisted. Her body bore no defensive marks, and the house was in order, with everything in its place. The strange message left on Julie's back hinted at a crime motivated by jealousy, possibly stemming from a love triangle. But if that were the case, who was the message meant for? To substantiate this theory, physical evidence was needed: the weapon, fingerprints, or DNA traces. But most importantly, investigators needed to find Sam and talk to him. Unexpected twist. A week later, Sam Hare was found on May 29, 2010. Unfortunately, speaking with him was not possible. He was no longer alive and had been dismembered. His head and some body parts were discovered in El Dorado Park, while his torso was found at Liberty Theater on the Joint Forces training base in Los Alamitos. After the terrible news was shared with his family, his parents were outraged, blaming the police and media for their bias. Stephen insisted he knew his son was innocent, but others realized this too late. In that time, a shadow of doubt was cast over the honorable serviceman's name. Though it was eventually cleared, it came at a great cost. The guy in the baseball cap. A few days before the grim discovery, during the investigation, detectives tracked activity on Sam's bank accounts. If he was on the run, he would need cash. The detective's intuition was correct. The day after the crime, large sums were withdrawn from the suspect's card. However, surveillance cameras at the ATMs captured someone else. The individual turned out to be 16-year-old Wesley Freilich. The trail of the boy in the baseball cap was quickly picked up. He ordered pizza for home delivery and paid using the suspect's card. During questioning, the teenager appeared confused and didn't understand what was happening. When asked by officers how he got the card, he explained he had never met Sam and was hearing about him for the first time. He admitted receiving the card from 26-year-old Daniel Wozniak, who told him the card's owner was in jail and needed cash. Wesley knew Daniel well and decided to help. Without hesitation, he withdrew about $2,000 at various places and handed the money to Daniel, who let him buy a pizza in gratitude. The actor. Wesley and Daniel performed together in a community theater. The teenager openly admired Daniel's talent and charisma. However, acting didn't pay well, so Wozniak lived modestly but ambitiously. A few months ago, he proposed to his colleague, 22-year-old Rachel Buffett, who accepted. They were inseparable and appeared to be a strong couple, with their wedding ceremony just around the corner. When police decided to arrest the actor, it was at the worst possible moment, during his bachelor party. Needless to say, the young man was not pleased. On May 26th, during questioning, he admitted knowing Sam and had seen him a few days earlier. It turned out they were neighbors in the same apartment complex, which included not only living spaces, but also a pool, gym, recreation area, and barbecue spot. Fate brought them together at the beginning of 2010, and since then they occasionally hung out. In his testimony, Dan stated that he withdrew money from Sam's card at Sam's personal request. Dan claimed there was some shady scheme he was drawn into, which he deeply regretted. According to him, his neighbor asked him to withdraw cash and then report the card stolen to the bank to request a refund. In this situation, Sam supposedly promised Wozniak a good percentage, and since Dan was in dire need of money, he didn't refuse the dubious offer. I agreed, but I decided to ask Wesley to do it, so my face wouldn't appear on the surveillance camera and connect me to the fraud, Daniel explained. He also added that he last saw his friend in a car, accompanied by a man in a black baseball cap. He didn't know where they went. Interestingly, his fiancée told the same story, but their accounts sounded unconvincing, and Daniel was noticeably nervous. Therefore, the detectives decided to wait a bit before pressing him again. New information. At this time, the radio station was contacted by a local jazz musician named Chris. He said he knew Wozniak well and had loaned him $2,000 for rent a couple of weeks ago. On May 21st at 10:30 a.m., Dan asked Chris to stop by his home to pick up the money. However, instead of the full amount, he gave only $400, warning that it was all he had and promised to call as soon as he had more. During this time, Daniel, Rachel, and another person were present. Later, Chris recognized him as Sam Hare, the man from the news everyone was looking for. On the morning of May 22nd, Daniel contacted Chris again and repaid the debt. Upon learning the new details, Sam's parents had a false hope that their son was alive and being held hostage. However, this was not the case. After the witness shared this information, Dan presented another version of events. During the second interrogation, he said that on the morning of May 22nd, Sam came to him,
appearing frantic. When asked what happened, Sam confessed he had done something foolish and ended the life of his friend. In response, Dan advised him to go to the police, but Sam threatened that if anyone else found out, there would be problems not only for him, but also for Daniel and Rachel. Fearing for his life, the new suspect did everything Sam ordered. He drove him to the specified address, after which the former soldier handed over his credit card, stating he no longer needed it and that it would come in handy for the couple. Wozniak admitted he was confused at the time and didn't know how to act. He knew well that Sam had served in combat and expected anything from him. When asked by the investigator why he changed his testimony, the actor explained that he was afraid, supposedly fearing he might be held accountable as an accomplice. Fatal mistake. However, the detectives didn't believe Daniel Wozniak's story. It was clear he was hiding something, being evasive, and trying to justify himself. When the detectives asked for a DNA sample to rule him out as a suspect, he went silent. After some time, he admitted he had been in Sam's apartment and had seen the crime scene firsthand, which meant he could have left traces. "I knew Sam had a stash of money, so I decided to take it since he was on the run," Daniel explained his actions. At the same time, he swore he didn't end Julie's life, even though all the evidence seemed to point to him. By this point, the detective's suspicions had solidified. It was obvious that the suspect was lying. So the authorities decided to use the well-practiced good cop, bad cop method. Eventually, Daniel's position weakened and he was officially reclassified as a suspect, alongside Sam, who still hadn't been found. Thus, the investigation considered that several people might have been involved in Julie's crime. The final piece of the puzzle came from a conversation between Rachel and Dan. Apparently, Rachel didn't realize they were being monitored and made a big mistake. Throughout Wozniak's arrest, his fiancée was unusually calm, as though the canceled wedding didn't upset her, suggesting she knew more than she let on. Her involvement in the crime wasn't ruled out. During a visit, Rachel told Dan that she had given a backpack to Dan's brother, as he had asked. The recording of the conversation was added to the case file and played in court, becoming a key piece of evidence. The show is over. After talking to his fiancée, the suspect was called in by investigators. The young man appeared confused and cornered, seemingly realizing it was over and denying was pointless. So he confessed to everything at once. As he spoke, he grew more confident, occasionally smiling. He began his confession by saying, "I ended both their lives because I'm crazy." He then described his perfect crime. On May 21st, he asked Hare to help move things in the theater's attic, which Sam agreed to as he never refused to help. When Sam turned away, Daniel shot him in the back. Sam didn't immediately understand what had happened, likely never realizing he had become a victim of his friend. In pain, he fell to the floor, remaining conscious, and asked Dan to check what had hit him and help him up. Instead, Daniel approached and shot him in the head. Then, Daniel left the body in the attic and went to perform on stage. After successfully completing the show, he returned to the crime scene and used a saw and an axe to dismember the former soldier's body. Later that evening, he sent Julie a message from Sam's phone, asking to meet. She immediately responded to the request. When she arrived, he pretended to sob behind the door, then let her in and asked her to come to the bedroom. There, he shot the unfortunate woman twice in the back of the head. But that wasn't enough for the scoundrel. He decided to stage an assault and tore her pants, leaving a provocative message on her shirt. He wanted to divert suspicion and tarnish his friend's reputation. The next day, Wozniak approached Wesley, then returned to the theater, where he calmly put the body parts into bags. Some of them, including the head, were placed in a large bag and dumped in the park, not even bothering to bury the remains. During his account, Dan mentioned that he found his actions amusing. He then revealed where he had left the pieces.
Despite his confession, Wozniak didn't consider himself guilty and requested a lawyer. Upon hearing the criminal's version, the detectives proposed their own. They believed they were dealing with a cold, calculating criminal, not a madman. He executed his monstrous plan for financial gain. It was known that he needed money and had significant debts. He also wanted to have a lavish wedding, but lacked the funds. Perhaps during one of their gatherings, Sam had confided in him about having a substantial amount of money in his account, which sparked Daniel's bloodthirsty plan. He decided to frame Hare and stage the crime. Initially, the investigation was led to believe it. For a long time, the missing man was considered guilty. Irrefutable evidence. Detectives soon found a backpack full of evidence. It was located near the home of the defendant's parents and contained Sam's personal belongings, clothes, a mobile phone, and a wallet. After searching the criminal's residence and examining his computer's browser history, some intriguing facts emerged. Daniel's premeditation was evident from his Google searches: how to hide a body and quick ways to end someone's life. They also found the weapons used in the crime and dismemberment. Ballistic tests later confirmed that the shots were fired from the recovered pistol. Sam's torso was so mutilated that it could only be identified by a tattoo on his chest that read "Mom and Dad" in a heart. The next day, investigators shared the shocking news with the Hare family. It was a devastating blow, especially since it was the eve of their son's birthday, making it feel like a cruel joke. Nobody could understand what their loved one had done to deserve such a monstrous death. Until the case was solved, the Kibuishi family was also bewildered about why their daughter was taken from them. She had often spoken of her college friend and admired him, and it was hard for everyone to believe that such a pleasant young man could commit such horrific acts. Eventually, the truth came to light. Samuel Hare was buried as a hero with military honors. His family, Julie's family, friends, acquaintances, and former colleagues attended the farewell ceremony. Other compassionate citizens of Costa Mesa also came to pay their respects. Arrests. Finally, justice was served. The real criminal was caught. In November 2012, other individuals were arrested: his fiancée Rachel and his brother Tim. They were charged with being accomplices in hiding evidence and misleading the police. Detectives believed Daniel's girlfriend knew about his plans from the start, but she insisted otherwise, claiming she was unaware of the crimes. She stated she only fulfilled Dan's request to pass the backpack to Tim, who then hid it in a secret place. Allegedly, neither was interested in its contents or understood what was happening. Rachel was released on bail while awaiting her hearing. In February 2013, Buffett appeared on Dr. Phil, where she publicly declared she had been duped by her ex-fiancé. Verdict. In December 2015, nearly 5.5 years later, Daniel Wozniak went to trial. The prosecution viewed the defendant's actions as so heinous and cynical that they sought the death penalty. The prosecutor argued that greed was the motive behind Sam's death. While Julie's life was ended without reason, only to frame Hare, it was determined that the accused needed money to pay for a wedding and a luxurious honeymoon. He knew Rachel wanted a grand celebration and was willing to go to great lengths to fulfill her dream, even if it meant taking lives. No one could have imagined him capable of such things. He was considered a likable person, a talented actor, and a true life of the party. However, investigators revealed his darker side. It's worth noting Wozniak's defense. He secured one of the best attorneys. The lengthy pre-trial period was due to numerous motions and complaints against the detectives who conducted the investigation. The defense claimed they violated his rights by eavesdropping on his conversations and coercing him into confessing. Simultaneously, they insisted he was mentally unstable. Despite numerous examinations, experts found no significant psychological disorders. During the investigation, Daniel seemed to revel in his notoriety. He also appeared on a talk show where he discussed the challenges he faced throughout the ordeal. His face often broke into a smile that became his trademark over time. Over 20 witnesses were called by the prosecution during the trial, including Wesley Freilich, who testified against him. Initially, the young man was arrested, but was later released when detectives concluded he didn't know what had happened. and was simply fulfilling his acquaintance's request. Daniel's brother Tim also spoke against him, explaining he had no idea about the violent events and was inadvertently caught up in the intrigue. The defense didn't present anyone to vouch for the actor. Even his family didn't attend the trial. It was evident that the accused did not see himself as guilty and showed no remorse. Daniel's attorney attempted to cast Rachel in a negative light, shifting the blame onto her, claiming she was materialistic and manipulative. He likely wanted more than one defendant to look bad. The jury took an hour to reach a verdict. The court found Daniel Wozniak guilty and sentenced him to death. The victims' families were satisfied with the decision. "I only regret that I can't carry out the sentence myself," admitted Stephen Hare. Unfortunately, over time it became clear that the sentence would likely not be carried out. The governor of California announced a moratorium on the death penalty, effectively commuting the cold-blooded criminal's sentence to life imprisonment alongside 700 other inmates. This allowed him the opportunity to live on, unlike his victims. Tim Wozniak was found guilty of hiding evidence and, as part of a plea deal, received a 10-day sentence. In the fall of 2018, Rachel Buffett faced trial and was found guilty of providing false testimony, resulting in a 32-month prison sentence. As of now, the actress is free, and the wedding between the couple never took place. The history of crime worldwide includes numerous cases where money was the motive. However, this criminal story is shocking in its vileness and hopelessness. For his base desires, Wozniak deprived two wonderful people of their lives. Like a skilled puppeteer, he controlled their fates, and perhaps such people have a special place reserved in hell, or at least that's what the victims' families believe. The costs of the profession. Under the law, an investigation must be conducted fully, comprehensively, and objectively. However, as practice shows, crime investigations aren't always approached properly. Society often turns a blind eye to what's happening, justifying its indifference with absurd reasons like, it's his own fault. As a result, the victims' families are left alone with their grief and uncertainty. In the story to be discussed, everything was biased, from the search for a missing girl to the lengthy investigation and court proceedings. The criminal case was closed after 10 years. It was only thanks to the persistent efforts of the parents, a change of detective, and external intervention. Today, we will try to understand why the body of a young beauty was found in one of the livestock burial grounds, who was responsible for her death, and why such an attitude was formed towards the unfortunate victim. Disappearance. 19-year-old Kara Nichols disappeared on October 9, 2012, in the 6,700 block of Colorado Springs, Colorado, USA. She was last seen wearing a hooded sweatshirt, dark-colored jeans, white DC sneakers, and pink headphones. The tall blonde with green eyes had 2 tattoos, a marijuana leaf on her right ankle and an astronaut on her left wrist. She also had numerous piercings on her back, ears, and above her lip. Flyers distributed around the city listed these and other distinctive features of her appearance. Information that the missing person was suffering from bipolar or borderline personality disorder was also provided. The first to suspect something was wrong was her older brother Terrence. Later, Julia and Paul Nichols, Kara's parents, joined the search operation. The family knew that despite her use of banned substances, she always made contact and reported on her whereabouts. However, when the girl did not call back on October 10th and 11, her relatives became worried. They were always concerned about her, but she wanted to live a free life and refused to comply. Recently, she had become more distant and communicated only with her brother. Modeling, her occupation, was not yielding the desired income. Therefore, when she was offered a substantial paycheck for a lingerie photo shoot, she gladly accepted. She informed her roommates about her upcoming plans and left late at night. The shoot was scheduled for early morning in Denver, making the trip more convenient. Moreover, she was not traveling alone, but was accompanied by colleagues in the business. The girls, having no driver's licenses or a car, fortunately found a suitable driver. Kara's story raised no doubts. Acquaintances had seen her work portfolios multiple times. and her social media accounts were filled with professional photographs. Everything would have been fine, except that Nichols did not return the next day, nor the day after. The last time Terrence spoke with his sister was at 11:45 p.m. on October 9th. However, their conversation was unexpectedly cut off, after which she did not call back. Then the brother thought that the connection was lost, so he calmly went to sleep, knowing that they would definitely talk in the morning. However, on October 10th, Kara ignored all attempts to contact her. Her voicemail was continuously active. The brother again assumed she was busy or resting after work, and he waited for the model to appear on her own. But even on October 11th, there was no news from her. The brother's worry increased. Such silence was not typical for his close relative. In connection with this, Terrence visited her home, where he talked to neighbors. None of them had seen the friend for several days. One young man reported seeing Kara get into a dark-colored sedan around 11 p.m. Unfortunately, he could not see who was driving. The darkness hindered him. However, he mentioned that it seemed she was not alone. After that, Terrence entered his sister's room and looked around. His attention was drawn to the girl's personal items, which she never went without. Among them were a cosmetics bag, purse, charger, and laptop. $300 in cash lay on the bedside table. Clearly, Kara had not planned a prolonged absence. Then the brother turned on her laptop. It became clear that she had not been online for more than 2 days. This was out of character for the aspiring model, who promptly kept up with job offers. Convinced that his concern was not in vain, Terrence decided to report to the police. At the station, he recounted everything in order. However, the law enforcement officers were not in a hurry with the search. The officers claimed that Kara was old enough. She was not obligated to report her whereabouts to everyone. The police suggested that the girl might have been delayed at the shoot or went somewhere else. Maybe she had a boyfriend that no one knew about, and she was spending time with him. Nevertheless, the police's arguments did not satisfy the applicant. He knew his sister well. No matter what happened, she would have definitely made contact by now. Terrence insisted that something bad had happened to her. Nevertheless, the police did not take the boy's words seriously and advised him to come back later. The life of Kara Nichols. Kara Nichols was born on May 20th, 1993, and was the middle child in her family. She spent her childhood with her older brother and younger sister, growing up sociable and friendly, often surrounded by her family. Kara excelled in school and had a keen interest in art, particularly painting. As a talented child, she won several art competitions and was predicted to have a promising future. Yet she was sensitive, deeply feeling the pain of others as her own. During her teenage years, her behavior shifted. Kara became introverted, and her academic performance declined. At 13, she was arrested for shoplifting, which resulted in a sentence of community service. Her parents were baffled by the sudden change, as they had always been attentive and loving. She had never wanted for anything, so her theft was likely a form of rebellion against established norms. At 16, Kara's mental health began to falter following the loss of her beloved dog, which plunged her into a deep depression. Her parents sent her to a psychologist, but the sessions proved ineffective, and her condition worsened. Eventually, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she was diagnosed with a personality disorder. After a brief treatment, she showed improvement with the help of prescribed medications. However, due to severe side effects, Kara gradually stopped taking them and worsened her unstable mental state by using banned substances, believing them to be a better alternative to antipsychotics. Behavioral issues led her to attend several alternative schools until she finally graduated. After high school, Kara worked as a waitress and pursued her childhood dream of becoming a model. Her appearance was promising, and she sincerely believed she could succeed in the field. She diligently searched for modeling agencies and worked on her portfolio. During this time, her health noticeably improved, and she even quit her harmful addiction. However, as time passed, she realized that beauty alone was insufficient for a successful modeling career. Luck and extensive connections were necessary. In the summer of 2012, the Nichols family moved to Chicago, Illinois. However, The new city did not welcome Kara, and her depression returned. Stress led her to resume her harmful habit, despite her parents' support and attempts to help by enrolling her in a drug rehabilitation program, which she was soon expelled from for refusing to follow the rules. The Nichols were at a loss on how to guide her and were deeply concerned about where she was getting the money for her addiction, since her small waitress salary was clearly insufficient. After discontinuing her treatment, Kara's parents became disillusioned. Her psychological state fluctuated daily. After brief discussions, she decided to return to her hometown, believing that familiar surroundings and social circles would help restore her to life. Her family disliked the idea but could not persuade her to stay. Eventually, Kara returned to Colorado Springs. Terrence promised to look after her, and their open and warm relationship somewhat reassured the parents. However, Kara wanted independence and did not stay with her brother, only visiting him occasionally. She rented an apartment with other male tenants, shocking her parents when they learned she was living under the same roof with 3 men. They demanded she find other housing, but she refused, explaining that she had no better options and had found the men to be harmless. Gradually, everything went back to normal. Kara returned to her previous job and continued modeling work by creating a profile on Model Mayhem. Over time, she received more offers, but they did not lead to the expected results. Breaking into the desired world among thousands of profiles was challenging. Later, Kara faced problems. She fell behind on rent and even borrowed food from her roommates. She discussed these issues with her brother, who also supported her financially. Thus, she was determined not to miss the opportunity presented to her on October 9th. However, no one expected that night to be her last. Investigation. After being turned away at the police station, Terrence reached out to his parents. The eldest son recounted what had happened and asked for help, knowing that in such cases, collective pressure was necessary. As soon as the family learned of their daughter's disappearance, they immediately flew to Colorado Springs. Kara's cell phone was still turned off, and it was also discovered that she had not shown up for the job she valued so much, confirming their worst fears. Convinced, the Nichols family as a whole went to the police. Law enforcement was compelled to respond to their report. Eventually, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office acknowledged that the circumstances of her disappearance raised questions. Detectives reached out to local residents asking for any information about the girl's whereabouts. At the same time, the parents allowed investigators access to her cell phone data. Experts confirmed that the last message Kara sent was to her brother. Based on cellular provider data, it was known that on October 9th, her mobile device was indeed headed north, but was then turned off. Friends and acquaintances also joined the search efforts, distributing flyers throughout Colorado Springs and Denver. After talking with her close contacts, investigators examined other means of communication used by the girl, particularly her laptop. Thus, early in the investigation, a secret the girl had closely guarded from her family was revealed. Some of her modeling work, posted on websites, served as a cover for the escort services she had been involved in since she was 17. This was how Paul and Julia learned the true source of Kara's livelihood. However, there was not enough time to recover from the shock. Consent was needed to disclose this information to get new leads. At the same time, this circumstance could significantly affect the investigation and decrease public interest. Unfortunately, there are many examples where the perception of the victim was notably distorted in such cases. The Nichols didn't want to air their dirty laundry, but were forced to do so in the hope of an exception. However, no miracle occurred. After the new details were published, news agencies began canceling interviews with Kara's family one by one. Coverage of the disappearance waned. The search for the girl hit a dead end. The only organization that took up helping with the investigation was the National Women's Coalition Against Violence and Exploitation. They ensured that the community and authorities did not forget about the missing model. Search for witnesses. In November 2012, detectives announced their intention to speak with 2 women who were believed to have been in the car with Kara on the fateful night. Some even described their appearance. They possibly belonged to the same line of work as the missing girl. Undoubtedly, the witnesses were of interest to the investigation, but were not considered suspects. Most likely, these women were the last to see her alive. A composite sketch of one of them was made publicly available. However, hopes that someone would come forward proved vain. Later, even the testimony of their existence was doubted. The investigation stalled again. That month, Kara's photos appeared on an escort service website in Las Vegas. However, detectives found that the girl had not been involved in the posting. Someone had decided to capitalize on her popularity. Subsequently, the Nichols profile was removed. Concerned citizens periodically approached the police station. However, after verification, their reports turned out to be false. In the spring of 2013, a businessman from Colorado Springs claimed to have seen the sought-after woman from the end of October through December 2012. She was with a tall, unkempt man. The woman appeared frightened, as if she was being forcibly held and made to do something. One day, her companion pushed her, which did not escape the notice of a bystander. He threatened the man and asked him to leave the lady alone. The eyewitness's statement was verified. The police managed to find the man described, but detectives confirmed that the woman with him was his former girlfriend. In the autumn of the same year, a criminal law student decided to investigate Kara's case independently. He traveled to Denver and spoke with many homeless people and substance users. Some of them reported seeing the missing woman at a non-profit organization dealing with the exchange of syringes and needles for those using banned substances. However, it later turned out that the lead was false, and so it was with every testimony. Many had already given up hope of finding the story's heroine alive. Too much time had passed for this type of case. In the summer of 2013, the girl's parents announced a reward for any information regarding their daughter's whereabouts. But it all seemed futile. Kidnapping for ransom was ruled out as no demands had been made over the months. A new development. The following year brought a sensational breakthrough that spurred movement in the investigation. In May 2014, Deputy Sheriff Cliff Porter admitted to having cut corners in the investigation. Unexpectedly, he disclosed that he had not given enough attention to Kara Nichols's case and, most importantly, had overlooked substantial evidence that could have played a critical role in the early stages of the investigation. This confession shocked the Nichols family, as they felt the investigation into their daughter's disappearance had been treated carelessly due to her line of work. The inadequate handling of cell phone records called into question the entire office's conduct. The authorities' inaction did not go unnoticed. Numerous audits brought discipline to the department, and those responsible were removed from their positions. In May 2016, former Sheriff Terry Makita and members of his staff were charged with corruption, fabricating witness testimony, kidnapping, and extortion. This convinced the victim's family that their relative's case had never been appropriately handled. Nevertheless, this event provided a new impetus for the investigation. Thanks to a change in detectives in February 2022, the missing woman's body was discovered. She was found buried in a grave alongside a horse's corpse on a farm near Colorado Springs. But let's go through the details in order. The suspect. On February 1st, 2022, a woman named Christina Hollendorfer walked into the police station. Detectives had tried to speak with her several times before, but she had refused to cooperate. Since 2014, the witness had been unwilling to testify against her former husband, Joel. However, years later, she broke her silence and accused her ex of murdering Kara Nichols. An examination of the missing girl's calls and messages revealed that she had received 8 calls between 9:58 and 11:08 p.m. on October 9th, most of which were from a man named Joel Hollendorfer. Detectives had interrogated him several times, but beyond general information, they discovered little. He admitted to having hired the woman's services and had planned to meet her from the evening of October 9th to the morning of October 10th. However, the meeting never occurred. The escort did not make it to him. His statement raised suspicions, especially since the geolocation data from Kara's mobile device indicated that on the night of her disappearance, she was near the suspect's parents' house. On October 15, 2014, a search was conducted at the man's and his family's home. At the time of the search, detectives spoke with Joel and his mother, Betty. They noted their calm and friendly demeanor. It did not appear that they were hiding anything. They kindly showed the entire property, including several fresh burial sites for deceased animals. It should be noted that the Hollendorfer family had owned the farm since 1985 and had a large livestock yard. Dogs trained to find human remains searched the area. They reacted to some of the livestock graves a few times. However, further examination of their contents revealed nothing suspicious. It was possible that the dogs confused the scent of dead animals with that of a human. To definitively rule out Joel's involvement in the crime, samples from some suspicious areas were collected for analysis. However, the tests showed that the samples were unrelated to the case. Nonetheless, suspicions about the man were not lifted. It turned out that Hollendorfer had a history of harassment and violating restraining orders. He was a hardened criminal who had repeatedly violated the terms of his parole. Moreover, he had used banned substances, which had contributed to the breakdown of his family. The investigation had approached his ex-wife at least twice. During conversations, it was established that Christina and Joel were raising 2 children. Initially, the woman was reluctant to share details of their life together and later refused to communicate altogether. Thus, along with other theories regarding Kara's disappearance, Joel remained the only suspect. Finally, after 8 years, his identity was exposed. Mrs. Hollendorfer claimed that in November 2014, her ex-husband confessed to her that he had accidentally ended the life of a hired escort and buried her body in an old horse grave. She learned about this after the death of her father-in-law. When the funeral was over, her former husband revealed that he felt guilty about his father's death. According to her, he confessed to his parents what he had done. Learning the terrible news, the elder Hollendorfer fell into a deep depression, became seriously ill, and soon died. All this time, his family had been covering for the criminal. This explained the incredible hospitality and cooperation that Betty and Joel displayed during the farm search. Everything was done to avoid raising further suspicion. On February 3, 2022, another search was conducted at the suspect's home and property. This time, the farm was thoroughly dug up. Subsequently, human remains were found in a pit 2 meters deep. 4 days later, the 47-year-old man was arrested. Later analysis confirmed that the found corpse belonged to the sought-after Kara Nichols. Essentially, only her bones remained. However, thanks to modern technology, the girl was successfully identified: the defendant. During interrogation, the man didn't break down immediately. Eventually, however, he confessed that he had not intended to end the girl's life. He had indeed found her on an intimacy services website. On October 9th, he called her and arranged a meeting, after which he picked her up from her home. Intimacy occurred in his old car. Everything was fine until, in a moment of passion, the man began to strangle his companion. Once Joel realized that Kara had lost consciousness, he stopped. Initially, he tried to administer first aid, but it was too late. Kara was already deceased. Frightened, the criminal drove her to his family farm and buried her in the first grave he found. He moved the body several times and eventually buried it where his mother's favorite horse was interred. This explained why the search dogs were confused by the scents. Moreover, during the initial search, this particular area had not been inspected. Soon, Joel Hollendorfer was charged with first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. Meanwhile, Betty denied any knowledge of the crime committed by her son, asserting that she had always cooperated with the investigation and genuinely believed in his innocence. Justice. The hearings took place in the summer of 2023. The prosecution insisted that the defendant had intentionally committed the crime, thus realizing his sinister fantasies. At the same time, forensic experts could not provide detailed information about the victim's death. However, based on the fact that Kara's hyoid bone was broken, asphyxiation was named as the cause of death. Experts claimed that one cannot accidentally strangle someone to death. There is always time to reconsider and stop. Another factor considered was the victim's state under the influence of banned substances. Hollendorfer's defense argued that Nichols's death was due to asphyxiation from which he could not recover. Under similar circumstances, the likelihood of recovery for a healthy person is significantly higher than for a substance-dependent individual. As depicted during the trial, an entrenched addict, which the victim was portrayed to be, would have no chance of survival. This was explained by the long-term effects of banned substances on the human body. Unfortunately, it was impossible to confirm or refute the lawyer's statements over time. The Nichols family was extremely upset by how their daughter was portrayed. Kara's father noted that this judgment negated any sympathy from the jurors and depicted her as an unworthy victim. Nonetheless, during the trial, Joel did not appear remorseful. Some observed that he even smiled at times. Ultimately, the defendant's actions were reclassified to second-degree murder. He was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 24 years in prison. The sentence did not satisfy the victim's family, who had hoped for a life sentence for the perpetrator. Moreover, due to insufficient evidence, no one else was punished. Julia and Paul Nichols called the process a complete miscarriage of justice. The bereaved parents hope that despite the numerous labels attached to their daughter, Kara's friends and acquaintances will remember her positively, not just as sensational news. She was a teenager who battled with mental health issues but was cruelly dehumanized, concluded the girl's mother about the investigation and trial process. Do you think justice was fully served in the case of Kara Nichols's disappearance and death? Love to the grave. It is not uncommon for the ship of love to crash on the rocks of marriage. Married life does not always meet expectations. During falling in love, the world seems in a rosy light, and the beloved man is the limit of dreams. True attitudes are tested over time. Unfortunately, for most couples, the truth comes out too late, and when the matter smells of divorce, it turns out that it is not so easy to get out of codependent relationships. In such cases, people go through a severe crisis. Some don't dare to follow through. Others start a new life. Former lovers have a lot in common: the past, children, jointly acquired property, loans, and other circumstances. Dealing with these issues seriously undermines mental and physical health. Harmonious perception of the breakup by both parties is rare. That's when one thing remains paramount: not to lose your temper and make things worse. Brett Sickett and Vashti Forrest, lovers from Kansas, who tied themselves in marriage on the beach in Belize. The young people planned the perfect life. They moved to Kingman, bought a house, and had 2 children. Each of them had a favorite job and got a professional vocation. Sooner or later, however, any fairy tale ends. Over time, outwardly harmonious relationships ceased to correspond to reality. Spouses quarreled and reconciled, and even tried joint psychotherapy. However, the events that occurred on the night of April 30th, 2011, put an end to their love story. Detectives had to understand what caused such an unexpected denouement. Was it the wife's unstable mental state, or her husband's uncontrollable sense of ownership? One thing was clear: the house fire was the result of an accident or a brutal murder. Love story. Brett and Vashti met in high school. The girl stood out among her friends and was very pretty. Her boyfriend was an outstanding athlete. They loved each other very much and were always together. In 2004, young people got married, after which they decided to settle in Brett's hometown. Everyone in the neighborhood considered the family's Sickett exemplary. The spouses raised 2 sons, 4-year-old Brandon and 2-year-old Bronson. The head of the family worked as a sheriff's deputy and also taught at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Vashti was building a successful career as a communications representative at Cox Communications. No one who knew them doubted that they had a wonderful union, however. They just didn't really spread the word. The couple definitely had problems. From the moment they met, Brett had controlled Vashti. At first it was a slight pressure, but years later his overbearing character intensified. He was jealous of his wife and sometimes even suspected of cheating. At the same time, Vashti tried to please in everything. She was a kind and cheerful woman who took care of her family. She respected her husband and tried to keep the peace. but in doing so, she did not notice how she lost herself in her marriage. Her friends recalled that in recent years she changed a lot. She became thoughtful and uncommunicative. As it turned out later, Sikat limited her contact with loved ones. He didn't like sharing her with anyone, as he repeatedly stated, so Vashti would call and see her nearest and dearest in his absence. Brett also had a big grievance regarding her work. Vashti was a diligent employee and worked hard. She often stayed late in the evenings, which provoked conflicts at home. Brett did not share her desire to socialize and establish herself in her career. He believed that he earned enough to support the family alone. But his spouse thought otherwise. She wanted to be independent and contribute to the family budget. Besides, she loved her job and saw it as an outlet. Attempts at happiness. The man believed that his wife's fatigue after work greatly affected her emotional background. However, it is not known what affected Vashti's mental state to a greater extent: workload and increased responsibility or endless tension in the family. In the end, the young woman burned out and became depressed. In addition, the pills she had started taking were having a negative impact on her well-being. One day, Vashti decided to take a serious look at her health. She was complex about her appearance, or rather her lush forms. According to the results of tests, it turned out that weight gain provoked hormonal disorder. For natural weight loss, the doctor prescribed specialized drugs. However, the proposed treatment did not exclude some side effects, such as fatigue, increased irritability, and anxiety. It is likely that the treatment could have exacerbated the depressed state, and, as a consequence, caused serious consequences in the form of negative thoughts of self-harm. Vashti's family later confirmed that she was indeed depressed, but at the same time she tried to fight and live on, began to visit a psychotherapist. And since November 2010, in order to improve her relationship with her husband, she enrolled in family counseling. Final solution. Unfortunately, the list of mutual recriminations was growing day by day. Outside help did not help, the quarrels continued. Perhaps because the woman realized that the matter was heading for divorce, her depression worsened. It was difficult to see the collapse of a familiar way of life. She tried to be more out of the house, went out alone or with friends. She did everything to be alone with her husband less often. All in all, the decision to divorce was hard for her, but it was the best option for everyone. A few days before the tragedy, she saw a lawyer and signed the fateful papers. Vashti wanted to get custody of the children, but she was not against communication between the children and their father, but on one condition: the children would see their father in her presence. The fact is that Brett not only treated her harshly, but also the children. Despite their small age, he punished them for provinces and did not allow them to show weakness. The father believed that in this way he would raise real men, but at the same time clearly overreacted. On this ground in the family often happened quarrels. Kathleen Forrest, Vashti's sister, said that sometime before the decision to divorce, Vashti confessed a lot of things. She talked about her husband's behavior and the intolerability of the marriage, about her resentment and her desire to make things right, which never came to fruition. After listening to her, Kathleen concluded that Brett had all the characteristics of a narcissist and abuser. She had suspected this before, but after a frank conversation with her sister, she became convinced. A short time later, Vashti was gone. Before her death, she handed her husband a divorce petition. Fire. On April 30th, 2011, at 3:57 a.m., emergency services received a call. The caller identified himself as 35-year-old Brett Sickett and reported the incident. His wife, 34-year-old Vashti Sickett, set the house on fire and then took her own life. The man also added that there were children inside, but he managed to save them. He also tried to carry his spouse out. However, the entire building was engulfed in flames and he was unable to help her. The dispatcher took the call, urged him not to leave the children alone and not to enter the burning house again. When emergency services arrived on the scene, there was no one to rescue. After putting out the fire, rescuers went inside. On the second floor, in one of the bedrooms on the bed, was a charred corpse. The woman was lying on her left side as if sleeping. Her arms and legs were bent. Brett's version. After he had recovered a little from the shock, he was talked to by fellow police officers. After he calmed down, he explained more about what had happened. According to him, at around 3 a.m., his wife called him and said that if he wanted the boys, he should go upstairs and get them. He was sleeping downstairs on the couch that time. Brett did as Vashti asked. He figured she wasn't feeling well and the boys in the next room were bothering her. Going up to the second floor, he peeked in on the children who were sleeping peacefully. At the same instant, he smelled the odor of burning, and further shots followed. With all his legs, the man rushed towards the noise to his wife's room. When he opened the door, he saw the bed on fire and his wife immovable on it. As he got closer, he realized what had happened. Everything around was splattered with blood, and the woman showed no signs of life. The fire was burning with unimaginable intensity. Brett held her against him, trying to lift her up, but because of the scalding flames, he couldn't do so. Then he made the decision to rescue the children and then go back for Vashti. He grabbed the sleepy children and carried them outside. He then put them in his car and called emergency services. While making the call, he did try to go inside the burning house. Brett covered his face with a wet napkin, but he couldn't get very far. The entire room was filled with smoke. He didn't recognize his surroundings and moved almost by feel. Somehow or other, the fire was stronger and forced him to surrender. The head of the family looked confused. When asked by the police what he thought had caused the fire, he explained the following. Vashti had been in an unstable emotional state lately, causing her to have bad thoughts on more than one occasion. She may not have been able to cope with them and put the plan into action. Brett also explained that before going to bed, they discussed the upcoming divorce with his wife. Finally, they decided on the division of property and child rearing. In fact, it was their last night together. It is possible that the woman was so upset that she decided to die. There was one thing I didn't understand. Why would she start a fire and endanger the children? Even if she did take care of them and asked her husband to take the boys, why destroy the house? At that point, there were no answers to these questions. What had happened did not add up to a coherent picture. The investigators had a difficult task ahead of them. They had to establish whether in fact a loving wife and mother of 2 children voluntarily left her life, or she was helped in this. Unconcealed suspicions. When Vashti's relatives learned of the tragedy, they contacted law enforcement officials. They demanded that the investigation be treated with special attention and that the events be viewed from the perspective of murder. The woman's relatives assured that she could not have committed arson and then taken her own life. Despite her difficult family situation and divorce proceedings, she loved life and her children. Undoubtedly, Vashti was going through a difficult time. Her sanity was shaken, but not to that extent. Moreover, the Forrests were convinced that a mother like her would never have risked the children's lives and made them homeless. Vashti was a loving and caring mother. Every day she would get up at 4 a.m. to prepare a fresh and natural breakfast. She was attentive to everything and had a big and pure heart that knew how to be compassionate. For an example, Kathleen recalled an incident in her life. One day, her sister learned that a kindergarten boy had been diagnosed with cancer. The child could have been saved, but his family needed financial help. Vashti came to the rescue with a fundraiser. She began baking pancakes, which were in particular demand. After each trade, Vashti gave the proceeds to the boy's family. It was unlikely that such a woman would leave her children to fend for themselves. In addition, she made big plans for the future. Together with her sister, she planned a vacation in Mexico, made repairs to the house, and every evening after work hurried to her sons. After a visit to the doctor, Vashti Sikhet thoroughly took care of herself. She started exercising, eating right, and began to lose weight. Finally, she was starting to like herself in the mirror. Just a week before this happened, she had updated her closet. All indications were that the deceased was determined to move on. The brother and sister asked detectives to take a closer look at Brett's personality and told them what they knew. Although Kathleen, Richard, and Vashti lived in different states, They were close to each other and tried to keep in touch. The family was aware of the problems their sister was facing and were not going to keep quiet. However, they were worried that because of Sikit's position, the local police might have turned a blind eye to what had happened. Therefore, they revealed that their sister had complained about threats from her spouse more than once recently. He was against the divorce and did not want to let Vashti go. The man said that he would do something to her and nothing would happen to him for it. He reasoned that given his police skills, he'd make it look like an accident and they'd believe him. Evidence. However, the investigators did not rush to conclusions and began to study the available evidence. And there was plenty of it in the case. First, during the examination of the scene, criminalists managed to find a lot of interesting things. Near the hearth of the fire was a canister of gasoline, indicating that the arson was, in fact, premeditated. Secondly, the incongruous position of the gun used to shoot the deceased. It was under her body, muzzle down. This raised a lot of questions. David Folletti, senior special agent in charge of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, stated, "If Vashti shot herself lying down, the gun would have fallen to the floor. If she was sitting up and shot herself, the gun should have remained on her right side. The position in which it was found just didn't make sense." Even more disturbing was the trajectory of the bullet. However, it took time for the experts to get to the bottom of it all. Fourthly, when examining the contents of the lady's purse, a notebook was found. One of the pages contained a farewell message. Vashti wrote that she couldn't fight anymore. For that reason, she had to say goodbye to her husband and sons. She bequeathed to Brett to take care of the children. She asked the boys to be strong and forgive her. Vashti promised to watch over everyone from heaven. Despite the obviousness of what had happened, there were many inconsistencies in the case. It was as if someone was trying to make it look like wishful thinking. Next, the authorities investigated the couple's life and interviewed the people around them. Family opinion. The Forrest family said that just a short time ago, Vashti served her husband with divorce papers, and just a couple days later, she died. They knew that Brett was pressuring her, but no one believed he could follow through. Everyone thought the dissolution of the marriage would be a protracted process at the very least. Vashti was afraid her husband would take the children away from her, so she put up with it for years. Everyone described him as uncommunicative and secretive. He had almost no friends, and colleagues at work considered Brett arrogant. He was the complete opposite of his wife. Eventually, her stamina reached its limit, and she made the decision to separate. Everyone knew what the man's reaction was. He was angry and canceled a planned dinner with friends. In response, Sikit stated that he would do anything to prevent his wife from seeing the children. Undoubtedly, such a prospect was frightening. So that same day, Vashti took the boys and spent the night at a friend's house. In this way, she wanted to give her husband time to step back and get used to the new realities. Vashti hoped he would pack up his things and leave home. But instead, he stayed. From what he said, he needed time to find a new place to live. Brett's speech touched Vashti's good heart. She hoped she could resolve the disagreement in a civilized manner, so she returned home the next day, full of hope that the dispute would be resolved and the divorce would be amicable. In principle, Brett himself did not hide it. He initially admitted that his spouse was worried about child custody. As a loving father, he did not want to part with his sons and was going to fight. However, allegedly on that ill-fated night, he and his wife reached an agreement. Unfortunately, on April 29th, the deceased did not communicate with anyone, and what was going on at their home is unknown. Witnesses. The testimony of a neighbor of the family shed light on the situation in the house. The witness said that on the night of April 30th, she was suffering from insomnia. At 3:15 a.m., the silence outside the window was broken by the sound of clapping. The words of the eyewitness made one wonder. It was unclear why Brett had called emergency services 42 minutes later. Brett was a police officer and knew full well that delay could have tragic consequences. In addition, the experts listened to his call again. The man's voice seemed reserved and cold. It gave the impression that he did not care. Then the investigators talked to the psychotherapist, whom the couple visited. The specialist said that Vashti was concerned about her husband's reaction and the threats she was receiving. She shared that during one of the arguments, her husband confessed that he dreamed of killing her. This statement frightened Vashti, but she did not believe that he was capable of such a thing. The therapist herself characterized Brett as a narcissist with latent psychopathic tendencies. Autopsy. By this time, the autopsy results on the deceased were in. Pathologists reported no traces of soot or smoke in the lungs, indicating that the woman died before the fire. Cause of death appears to be a gunshot wound to the head, but the strange thing was, it wasn't the only one. Pathologists found several other wounds to the chest and thighs, which is unusual for a man who voluntarily left his life. The toxicology report found that Vashti was not under the influence of any substances at the time of death. Suspect. Brett was eventually called in for questioning. He was extremely unhappy and did not understand why he was suspected. In the process, he explained that he loved his wife very much and was experiencing the sorrow of loss. He was left alone with 2 children and was mentally shattered. The officers then bluntly asked the co-worker if he was involved in the death of his spouse, to which Sickett replied that if he had wanted to kill her, he would have thought of something better. However, he was countered that he was well aware of how well fire destroys all evidence. "I would never burn our house down, much less put my children in a situation like that," Brett justified himself. About the threats to his wife, the suspect explained that it was a farce. Thus, he just wanted to hurt her feelings and make her worry. In turn, he insisted that he would never touch his beloved. When asked what provoked Vashti to start a fire in the house, he was evasive. Allegedly, she hated the place. Brett made it sound good, but no one believed him. The first time, he explained that he had run into his wife's room and tried to help. However, there was no evidence to support this. At that time, his appearance spoke to the contrary. There were no bloodstains, soot, or traces of fire on his clothes or body. In fact, he was in the very epicenter of the fire, and yet he remained unharmed. That's impossible. So he didn't go into the burning room and lied to make his wife look bad. Goodbye. A few days after Vashti's death, her funeral was held. The memorial service was held in front of the burned house. At the ceremony, gathered relatives and familiar people did not bypass the tragedy, and not indifferent citizens. All mourned the untimely passing of a woman and mother of 2 children. Brandon and Bronson were informed that the mother went to heaven. The little ones asked God to bring her back. Those who came spoke well of Vashti, remembering her character. When the rumors spread through the town, everyone found it hard to believe that she could leave her babies to be raised by a tyrant husband. The investigation into the case moved quickly. The pants Brett was wearing the night of the fire were sent for examination. It showed gasoline droplets on them. That was evidence against him. The laptop that miraculously survived was examined. It turned out that before the fire, several requests had been made from it on how to get rid of the evidence. In addition, a close examination of the scene revealed several traces of fire. So he acted with certainty. The handwriting examination of Vashti's suicide note revealed that the deceased's handwriting was forged. The trajectory of the bullet was examined in detail. The forensics revealed that the shot was fired from a distance. Vashti would have needed an unrealistic arm extension and bend to make the shot herself. Trial. Brett Sickett was eventually arrested on May 14, 2011. He was charged with murdering his wife, arson, and child endangerment. 2 years later, the trial began. The prosecution insisted on the defendant's guilt and presented all the available evidence in the case. They were so undeniable and sufficient that those present in the courtroom had no doubts about his involvement. As experts were invited specialists in handwriting, ballistics. Forensic experts and a psychotherapist also testified. Connie Suderman, a family counselor, admitted that hours after his wife's death, Brett called her. He admitted that he was responsible for her death. During the hearing, the defendant explained that his words were being misinterpreted. For 19 years, I was the one who protected her, but in the end pushed her to what I was protecting her from. So I believe Vashti's death is on my conscience," he explained. Brett expressed that in making the decision to pass away, their last conversation was fatal. After a number of forensic tests, it was discovered that the farewell note was forged by none other than the deceased's spouse. According to the prosecution, on the morning of April 29th, Brett had no intention of leaving home, but not for lack of another place to live, but for another reason. He had something terrible in mind. On the night of April 30th, when everyone was asleep, Brett took a .44 caliber Magnum pistol. He went into his wife's bedroom and shot her several times. Then he set the fire. Next, he carried the children out and contacted emergency services. The prosecutor cited a sense of property and a desire for revenge as the motive for such a brutal crime. The jury had 5 hours to reach a verdict. In the end, 37-year-old Brett Sickett was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with parole after 25 years for murder, 5 years in prison for arson, and 1 year for endangering the lives of his sons. The defendant disagreed with the sentence. He was so angry that he dared to tell the jury and the judge that they were going to hell. Life after. Time later, the defendant appealed, however, the verdict remained unchanged. After numerous trials, Vashti and Brett's children were given to the care of Kathleen Forrest. The fact is that there was a fierce struggle between the two families for the upbringing of the children. In the end, the court decision sided with the Vashti family. Currently, the convict is in a correctional facility located outside of Kansas. His transfer is due to the fact that former law enforcement officers do not serve time with criminals they may have put away. This is how the Sickett family's story ended tragically, a beautiful beginning and a monstrous ending. The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Oakland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Carmen completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and a measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted, but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Thomas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash can and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment was an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not found connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had seen through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? The police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan, a meat cleaver, and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was, but it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside a supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body, but an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Wenning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Wenning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. "We will never forgive him for what he did to our family," said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. "I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers," added her stepfather Wayne. Callahan's attorney, Stuart Grieve, said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing, we are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd.